He looked her up and down, the way a man examines livestock at auction, slow, dismissive, his eyes traveling from her boots to the top of her head and back again, and then he said it loud enough for half the platform to hear. "She's too small. I need a woman who can work, not a girl who'll blow away in the first dust storm." Clara Bennett stood on the sun-baked platform of Red Hollow Station with her single trunk and her careful posture and said absolutely nothing. She had traveled 4 days on 3 different trains. She had read his letters so many times the creases had gone soft. She had answered every question he asked about her background, her health, her willingness to work hard. And in under 30 seconds, Chester Holt had looked at her and found her wanting and made sure the dozen strangers nearby knew exactly why. What would you do if everything you had counted on collapsed before you even stepped off the platform? If the life you had packed your trunk for, the one you had crossed half a country to reach, evaporated in the time it takes a man to clear his throat? If this story grips you the way Frontier Dust grips everything, stay. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss what comes next, because the stories here are the kind that follow you long after the screen goes dark. Hit that like button and drop a comment with the city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far Clara's story has traveled. Now let's go back to that platform, because what happened next changed everything. The morning Clara Bennett arrived in Red Hollow, Texas, the temperature was already climbing past 90 before 9 o'clock, and the town smelled like horse manure, sawdust, and something faintly metallic that she later learned was the water from the nearby creek, which ran shallow and mineral-heavy in dry years. She noticed these things the way people notice irrelevant details when their mind is trying to protect them from the main event. She had dressed carefully that morning in the cramped sleeping car, using the small square of mirror above the basin to pin her hair and smooth the collar of her blue traveling dress. Not because she was vain. Clara Bennett had never had the luxury of vanity, but because she understood that first impressions were currency, and she had very little of any other kind. She was 26 years old. She had $42 in her purse when she boarded the train in Ohio, and after 4 days of ticket fees, a shared berth, and meals that were more necessity than pleasure, she had arrived in Red Hollow with $3.14. She knew this without having to count it again. She had counted it twice the night before in the dark, her fingers moving over the coins by feel. Chester Holt was easy to identify because he was holding a piece of cardboard with her name written on it in large, uncertain letters, as though he had not been entirely sure how to spell Bennett. He was broad across the shoulders, somewhere in his mid-30s, with a face that had been weathered into something harder than it probably deserved. Clara walked toward him with her trunk rolling unevenly on the platform boards, and she watched his expression shift the moment he registered her actual size. She was 5'2". She had mentioned this in her letters. She had mentioned it twice, actually, because her sister had warned her to be practical about these things. Chester Holt had apparently read her letters the way some men read contracts, with great confidence that the details would not apply to them. He did not say hello. He looked at her the way she later described it to no one, because there was no one to describe it to the way a man looks at something he ordered from a catalog that arrived wrong. His mouth moved before he had thought the words through, which was how she knew he was not a careful man. "She's too small. I need a woman who can work, not a girl who'll blow away in the first dust storm." Clara stood very still. This was something she had learned young, that stillness, in the face of humiliation, was its own form of armor. Her mother had taught her this, not with words but by example, standing still in 100 different doorways while the world outside decided what to do with her. "Mr. Holt," Clara said, and her voice was steadier than she felt. "I believe I mentioned my height in my second letter." "You did," he said, as though this somehow settled the argument in his favor. "I just didn't think." He stopped, made a gesture that was part dismissal, part apology, and entirely infuriating. "It won't work. I'm sorry for the inconvenience." He left. He simply turned and walked away, taking his cardboard sign with him, and within 2 minutes, he had disappeared into the crowd of people meeting the train, and Clara was left standing on the platform with her trunk and her $3.14, and the specific nauseating feeling of having been weighed and found insufficient before she had said more than 10 words. She had 2 other names in her pocket. This was not, in the brutal arithmetic of her situation, the worst thing that could happen. She had been practical enough, or perhaps desperate enough, to correspond with 3 men simultaneously, reasoning that the frontier was unpredictable and that having options was not dishonesty but survival. Her mother had raised her on survival. It was the one inheritance that had never run short. The second name was a farmer named Gerald Pruitt, who had arranged to meet her at the feed store on Main Street at 10 o'clock. Clara pulled her trunk off the platform, asked a boy of about 12 if he knew where the feed store was, gave him a nickel she could not quite afford, and walked. Red Hollow was the kind of town that had ambitions it hadn't quite figured out how to fulfill. There was a 2-story hotel with peeling paint that had probably looked promising 3 years ago. There was a bank, a general store, 2 saloons, a barbershop, and a church whose bell had gone missing. Streets were unpaved, and the dust was fine and pale, and got into everything. Clara could feel it already working into the folds of her collar, the corners of her eyes. She walked with her spine straight and her chin level, because she had learned that how you carried yourself on the outside was the only thing you could fully control, and she was not about to let Red Hollow see her stumble. Gerald Pruitt was waiting in front of the feed store. He was thinner than his letter had implied. Or maybe it was just that everything about him seemed to have contracted, pulled inward, as though he had spent years bracing against wind. He shook her hand and looked at her for a long moment, and Clara thought, briefly, that this might go differently. It did not go differently. "You look," he said carefully, "like you've had a soft life." Clara blinked. "I beg your pardon?" Soft hands, small frame. He was not unkind about it, which somehow made it worse. "My last wife had arms like a field hand by the time she was 20. I need someone who can," he seemed to search for the word, "who can take it. The work, the weather. I lost a crop last spring and I can't afford another pause. I need strength, Miss Bennett. Real strength, I'm sorry." He said it like he meant it. Clara believed he did mean it. That did not make the platform tilt any less beneath her feet. She thanked him. She did not know why she thanked him, except that her mother had taught her that courtesy was the thing you owed yourself, not the other person. She watched him go, and then she stood in the dust in front of the feed store and took 3 slow breaths and did not allow herself to think about the train ride home, because there was no train ride home. There was no home to ride to. Her mother had been gone 14 months, the house sold to cover the debts, and Clara had come west because it was where the future was supposed to be, and she had believed it with the specific, fragile belief of someone who has no alternative. She had one name left. The third man was named Thomas Aldrich. He was a shopkeeper, and he had seemed, in letters, to be the most thoughtful of the 3 careful sentences, questions about her interests and her disposition, a small joke in the 3rd letter that had actually made her smile. She had privately thought of him as the safe option, the sensible choice, the one she would reach if the others didn't work out. She found the mercantile where he'd said to meet. She went inside and introduced herself to the woman behind the counter, who called for Thomas in a voice that suggested she found this entire arrangement mildly entertaining. Thomas Aldrich came out from the back, wiping his hands on his apron, and he was not unattractive, and he smiled at her, and for 10 seconds Clara thought that perhaps the day was about to change direction. "Miss Bennett," he said, "it's nice to put a face to the letters." "It is," she said. "I've appreciated your correspondence." They stood on either side of the counter, while the woman pretended to stock a shelf nearby. Thomas Aldrich looked at Clara with an expression that was almost apologetic before he had said anything apologetic, which was how she knew what was coming. "I've been thinking," he said, "about your situation." "My situation," Clara repeated. "You mentioned in your last letter that you expected." He cleared his throat. "Well, you wrote about wanting certain things. A home with some warmth to it, you said. Partner in the real sense of the word." "Yes," Clara said. She had written that. She had believed it was a reasonable thing to write. "I just think," Thomas said slowly, "that you might expect more than I'm able to give. A woman with that kind of expectation." He made a small gesture that she was becoming familiar with, the half shrug of a man declining responsibility for his own words. "It's a lot of pressure." Clara looked at him for a moment. "You're saying I want too much." "I'm saying our ideas of partnership might not match up." She picked up her gloves from the counter, where she'd laid them. Put them on one at a time, carefully, smoothing each finger. "Thank you for being honest, Mr. Aldrich." She walked out. She walked down the main street of Red Hollow, and she did not look at anyone, and no one stopped her. And when she reached the alley beside the hotel, she turned into it and stood with her back against the wooden wall and pressed both hands flat against the boards and breathed. Just breathed. The heat was extraordinary. Wood was rough and warm against her palms. Somewhere nearby a horse shifted its weight, and a door opened and closed. 3 men. One morning. All of them had looked at her and calculated and found her lacking not her character, not her intelligence, not anything she could actually defend or demonstrate, but her size, Her hands, her wanting, 3 different ways of being told that she was not enough. She was not going to cry in this alley. She had decided that before she finished the 3rd breath. She was not going to cry anywhere in Red Hollow that a stranger could see it, because she had been humiliated enough for one morning, and she was done giving this town anything else. The hotel called the Prairie Rest and cost 40 cents a night, which left her $2.74 and a problem she could not yet see the edges of. The woman at the desk, a widow named Mrs. Hatch, had the manner of someone who had seen every variety of human difficulty and had stopped being moved by most of it. She looked at Clara's single trunk, at Clara's careful posture, at the specific blankness of Clara's expression that was doing the hard work of holding everything together. "Rough morning?" Mrs. Hatch said. "I've had worse," Clara said, which was not entirely true but felt important to say. The room was small and very warm, and the window looked out onto the alley she had just been standing in. Clara set her trunk at the foot of the narrow bed and sat down on the mattress, which was not as bad as she'd feared, and looked at the wall, which was not as bad as the mattress. She took out her small notebook, the one where she kept addresses and figures, and the names of the 3 men, each crossed off now in her mind, if not yet on the page, and she wrote, "Arrived Red Hollow. 2.74. No arrangement." She sat with that for a while. Need a plan. As though a plan were something that could be simply summoned, like a dish at a restaurant. As though her circumstances had not narrowed to a single corridor with no visible door at the end. She was not helpless. Clara Bennett had never been helpless, even when her situation looked it from the outside. She could cook, keep house, sew with competence if not artistry, tend a sick person through a bad night, teach basic reading and arithmetic, manage a household ledger. She had done all of these things for her mother in the last 2 years of her life, when the illness had eaten through her mother's independence, and Clara had become, quietly and without drama, the person who held things together. She had skills. The frontier needed skills. What she did not have was a reference letter or a contact in this town, or a single person who knew her name in a favorable context. She went down to dinner in the hotel's small dining room that evening because she needed to eat, and because staying in the room felt like surrender. She sat at the end of a long table with several other travelers, ate beef stew that was more potato than beef, and listened to the conversation without contributing much to it. The man across from her was a rancher passing through, taciturn and weathered. A couple at the far end were arguing in low voices about something that seemed to be a long-running argument from the road. A younger man in a good coat talked too much about land prices. Clara ate her stew and thought about what she could do in the morning. There was the possibility of the general store. They might need someone who could help keep inventory. There was the hotel itself, if Mrs. Hatch could be persuaded that an extra pair of hands was worth something. There were laundries, kitchens, schoolhouses. She did not know if Red Hollow had a school. She would find out in the morning. Mrs. Hatch found her after dinner, in the narrow hallway outside the dining room. Woman came in this afternoon asking, Mrs. Hatch said, without preamble. She had the manner of someone who had decided to stop decorating her sentences. Someone looking for domestic work, housekeeping, child-minding, ranch work. She looked at Clara with an evaluating squint. "You'd be that someone, would you?" Clara went very still. "Who's asking?" "Rancher named Wyatt Mercer. Lost his wife about 1.5 years ago. Has 2 children, twins, 8 years old. House apparently gone to pieces, Mrs." Hatch paused. "He didn't come himself. Sent a note." She produced it from her apron pocket and handed it to Clara with the air of someone completing a transaction they didn't particularly care about. The note was short. The handwriting was not polished, but it was deliberate, each word given its own space, as though the writer had thought carefully before committing to ink. "Miss Bennett, I understand you arrived today, and your arrangements did not hold. I'm not offering marriage. I am offering honest work with fair wages for a woman who can keep a house and mind 2 children who have had a hard year. If you're interested, I'll be at the hotel at 7 tomorrow morning. You're under no obligation." W. Mercer. Clara read it twice. Then she folded it and put it in the pocket of her dress, next to the notebook. Not marriage, honest work. She lay awake most of that night, which she had expected. The room was warm and the street outside was louder than she would have liked, and her mind kept circling back to the day, to Chester Holt's cardboard sign and Gerald Pruitt's word, soft, and Thomas Aldrich's apologetic hands. She did not let herself cry. Not because she was too proud, but because the crying felt like something she would need to do properly, when she had the privacy and the time for it, and this was not yet the moment. She thought about Wyatt Mercer's note instead. The way he had written it, the precision of "you're under no obligation," like he had specifically considered how it would feel to be her, reading it. Like he had tried to leave her a door that didn't require her to twist herself to walk through. She did not know what kind of man he was. She knew that the note was thoughtful, and that thoughtfulness, in her experience, was not a thing people faked easily. She knew that there were 2 children who had lost their mother, which was a specific and terrible thing. She understood more than she wished she did. She knew that ranch work was hard and that she was tired, and that $2.74 was not enough to build a future on, no matter how carefully she planned. She knew she would be there at 7. When Wyatt Mercer walked into the hotel lobby the next morning, Clara was already sitting in the chair nearest the door, her spine straight, her hands folded, her small trunk beside her. She had put on her gray dress instead of the blue one. The blue dress was for arriving, and she had arrived. The gray dress was for working. She watched him come in and take the measure of the room the way a man does when he's used to reading spaces for trouble, and then he found her with his eyes and stopped. He was not what she had imagined. She had imagined without meaning to something like Chester Holt, broad and certain and loud. Wyatt Mercer was tall but lean, with a stillness to him that she had not expected. He had dark circles under his eyes that spoke of too little sleep over too long a period, and his coat was clean but had been mended at the left shoulder. His face was serious in a way that was not unfriendly, just used to being serious. Like the expression had settled in and become a habit. Crossed the lobby and held out his hand. "Miss Bennett." She shook it. His grip was firm but not aggressive. "Mr. Mercer." "You read my note." "I did." He sat in the chair across from her without asking, which she appreciated, not presuming to stand over her, not making her look up. "Straight with you about what I'm offering," he said. "The ranch is not in good shape. My wife passed 18 months ago, and the house it's been difficult to keep things together while running the cattle. Children are." He stopped, rubbed a knuckle across his jaw. "They're going through it. Both of them. In different ways." "How old?" Clara said. 8. "They're twins, boy and a girl." Clara nodded slowly. "What would you need from me?" "The house. Cook. Help with the children when I can't be there, which is most days during working season. I'm not asking for a mother, I want to be clear about that. They don't need a substitute, and I don't expect you to pretend to be one." His eyes, which were a particular shade of brown that she didn't have a word for, held steady on hers. "I'd pay $2 a week plus room and board. The room isn't much, but it's private." Clara thought about the $2.74 in her purse. She thought about Mrs. Hatch's face at the desk, and the thin mattress, and the alley. Thought, quickly and without sentimentality, about what her choices actually were. "I have some conditions," she said. Something shifted slightly in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but a recalibration. Like he had come in expecting the conversation to go one way and was now adjusting. "All right," he said. "I'll keep your house and help with your children. I'll do it honestly and I'll do it well. But I'm not there to be invisible, Mr. Mercer. I'll do the work on my own terms, the way I see fit. If something's not working, I'll tell you. If you disagree with how I'm doing something, you tell me, and we discuss it. I won't be managed like I don't have a mind." Wyatt Mercer looked at her for a moment. He had the specific look of a man encountering something he hadn't fully anticipated and was trying to decide whether he found it concerning or not. Then very slightly the corner of his mouth changed. "That's fair," he said. "And I'd want Sundays free." "Done. And the children, I won't pretend their mother didn't exist. I won't pretend anything, actually. If they need to grieve, I'll let them grieve." Something moved across his face at that. He looked down at his hands for a second, then back up. "That's yes," he said, and his voice had changed slightly, like something in it had been let out. "I'd want that." They did not shake hands again. There was no formal agreement signed or spoken. Clara stood and picked up her trunk, and Wyatt Mercer held the door, and they walked out into the early morning heat of Red Hollow together. 2 practical strangers with a practical arrangement, and the town barely noticed them go. But Mrs. Hatch did. She watched them from behind the desk with her arms folded and her expression unreadable. She had lived in Red Hollow long enough to recognize when something was beginning. She didn't know what it was yet. Neither did Clara. Neither probably did Wyatt. The wagon ride to the Mercer Ranch took the better part of an hour on a road that was more suggestion than fact. The land opened up around them slowly, the town falling behind, the sky taking over enormous and pale with heat, a particular kind of frontier sky that Clara had heard about, but not quite believed until she was under it. It did not make her feel small, exactly. It made her feel exposed. Like everything false about a person got burned away in that light, and you were left with whatever you actually were. She sat beside Wyatt on the wagon seat because there was nowhere else to sit, close enough to be aware of him as a physical fact, which was mildly uncomfortable in the way that proximity to strangers always was. He didn't fill the silence with conversation, and neither did she. She watched the land. She thought about what she had agreed to and the specific texture of the doubt that went with it. Not a doubt in what she was capable of, but a doubt in whether any of this was wise, whether wisdom was even the thing that applied to a situation where the alternative was 40 cents a night in the prairie rest, until her money ran out. Red Hollow knew me as the mail-order bride who got left standing, Clara said eventually, because she thought it was better to say it than to leave it unsaid. Wyatt was quiet for a moment. I know. I imagine it's a story that'll get around. Already has, he said, without any particular inflection. I heard it at the feed store yesterday afternoon. Clara turned to look at him. There was nothing in his face that indicated he found this interesting gossip. There was nothing that indicated he found it amusing. There was a neutrality to him that she couldn't quite read yet. And you still sent the note, she said. You came with references, he said. In your letters. Skills listed. I needed the skills. He kept his eyes on the road. What happened at the station wasn't about your skills. Clara looked forward again. The road wound around a low rise, and the ranch appeared ahead of them, a cluster of buildings in a shallow depression in the land, a windmill standing up against the sky, cottonwood trees that had been planted intentionally some years ago and had survived without becoming anything impressive. The house was 2 stories, which surprised her slightly. It had a porch that ran along the front. From this distance, it looked almost hospitable. She would see it differently up close. She could already tell. 2 small figures stood on the porch as the wagon pulled in. Clara watched them as the distance between them closed. The girl Mara, she would learn, stood very straight with her arms at her sides and watched the wagon with a seriousness that seemed too old for her face. The boy Cole had his arms crossed and was looking somewhere to the left of where Clara actually was, a deliberate act of not looking that was itself a kind of looking. 8 years old, both of them, missing their mother for a year and a half. Wyatt climbed down and Clara did the same, aware of the children watching and trying to decide how to hold herself not bright, not aggressively friendly, not apologetic, just present, like someone who intended to stay. Mara Cole, Wyatt said. This is Miss Bennett. She's going to be helping out at the house. Mara said carefully hello. Cole did not say anything. He looked at a point just past Clara's left ear. Clara looked at both of them and did not smile too wide and did not crouch down to their level in the way adults did when they were trying too hard. Hello, she said. You don't have to know what to think of me yet. That's all right. Mara blinked. Cole's gaze shifted, just barely, to her face and then away again. Wyatt looked at Clara, just for a moment, just a flicker, like something had surprised him. Then he reached for her trunk and said, I'll show you the house. And they went up the porch steps and through the door. Clara brought with her nothing but $3.14 and the stubbornness of someone who had been underestimated her entire life and was running out of patience with it. The house was worse than she'd expected. Not filthy. Wyatt was not a man who would tolerate outright filth, but neglected in all the ways that happen when someone is managing loss and labor simultaneously, and there are not enough hours. Dust thick in the corners, dishes clean but poorly organized. The kitchen functional but joyless, every surface stripped of the small domesticities that make a kitchen feel like someone lives in it. In the front room, a woman's mending basket still sat beside the window seat, half full, the needles rusted now. A piece of work still threaded that no one had touched in 18 months. Clara looked at the basket for a long moment. She did not touch it yet. She was not ready to touch it, and she did not think they were ready for her to. There was a right time for everything, and the right time for that basket was not the first morning. She put her trunk in the small room off the kitchen. That Wyatt showed her he was right. It wasn't much. But it had a window and a door that closed, and she had slept in worse, and she changed into her working clothes and went to look at the kitchen properly, the pantry, the supply situation, what they had and what they didn't. Then she rolled up her sleeves and she began. She started with the kitchen because the kitchen was where a house lived. She moved through it systematically, not frantically systematically, with the specific efficiency of someone who has kept house under pressure and knows the difference between what needs to be done today and what can wait. She found coffee beans and ground them. She checked the water situation. She organized the flour and cornmeal into a rational order. She found a mop and addressed the floor in front of the stove, which had received a winter's worth of boot traffic. An hour in, she heard the children's feet on the porch steps. She did not look up from what she was doing when the door opened. Cole came in first, then Mara behind him. They went to the shelf, where, apparently, kept a jar of hard candy, a small act of sweetness in an otherwise austere house, something their mother had probably started, and Clara did not comment on it. She just kept working. "What are you doing?" Mara said. "Cleaning the stovepipe area," Clara said. It needed doing. Mara considered this. Mama used to clean it in the spring. "She sounds like someone who knew how to keep a house running," Clara said. She felt rather than saw the twins exchange a look. She did not pursue it. She just kept scrubbing. Cole said finally, without looking at her, "You're not going to stay." Clara stopped what she was doing. She looked at him, at his crossed arms, his set jaw, his 8-year-old's furious certainty. "What makes you say that?" "Nobody stays. Mrs. Alderson left after 2 weeks. The other woman only came twice." Clara nodded slowly. "I'm not Mrs. Alderson," she said, "and I'm not whoever else came and left. I can't promise you what the future looks like, Cole. Nobody can do that. What I can tell you is that I'm here today, and I plan to be here tomorrow, and I'll tell you honestly if that ever changes." Cole stared at her. "It's the best I've got," Clara said, and went back to the stovepipe. Neither of them left the kitchen. They stood there eating their hard candy in the corner, while Clara worked, which was not welcome exactly, but it was not hostile, and she had learned from years of experience that the space between hostile and welcome was where everything that mattered usually happened. That evening she made a proper meal for the first time in that kitchen, biscuits and beans, and the last of a salt pork she found in the pantry. And when Wyatt came in from the barn, dusty and silent in the way of men who have been alone with hard physical work all day, he stopped just inside the kitchen door. He looked at the stove and the table and the food waiting, and he looked at Clara, and she waited to see what he would do with whatever he was feeling. Pulled out his chair and sat down. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," Clara said, setting down the biscuits. "I haven't proven anything." Cole stared at his plate. Mara quietly pulled out her own chair. Outside, the last of the daylight was going fast, and the first wind of evening moved through the cottonwoods, and Red Hollow was 7 miles away, and no one there knew or cared what Clara Bennett was doing at the Mercer Ranch. But she knew and she cared, and that she had decided somewhere in the alley beside the Prairie Rest Hotel was going to have to be enough. The biscuits were gone by morning. Clara noticed this when she came into the kitchen before first light to start the stove, still in the half-awake state where the mind is working before the rest of the person has caught up. The plate she had covered and left on the shelf, 3 biscuits wrapped in cloth, was empty. Cloth was folded back with a neatness that was either Mara or habit, and the biscuits were simply gone. She stood there for a moment looking at the empty plate. Then she started the fire. She did not mention the biscuits at breakfast. She made oatmeal instead, with a little molasses, because she had found the jar pushed to the back of the pantry shelf, and she set it on the table without ceremony. Cole came down first, as he apparently always did, and sat in his chair without looking at her, and ate without comment. Mara came second, her dark hair tangled from sleep, and ate half her portion before her eyes seemed to fully open. Wyatt came through from outside, where he had apparently already been working for an hour, and drank 2 cups of coffee standing at the counter before he sat down. Nobody talked much. Clara had been in enough households to know the difference between a family that didn't talk because they had nothing to say, and a family that didn't talk because they had too much. The Mercer kitchen in the morning was thick with the second kind of silence. It pressed against the windows. It sat in the chair where Clara suspected Ellen Mercer had once sat. She had learned the wife's name from a piece of stitchwork hanging in the hallway E.M. 1871, and from the mending basket, and from the way Mara sometimes looked at the window seat, the way you look at a place where someone used to be. After breakfast, Wyatt pulled on his coat and said, without particular address, "I'll be on the north fence line most of the day. Back by dark." Clara said, "I'll need to know what supplies you're short on." Stopped at the door. It was not, she sensed, a question he had been asked in a while. "Flowers low salt. We're out of lamp oil for the bedroom lamps." "I'll make a list," she said, "for when you go to town next." Something passed across his face that she couldn't name, not discomfort exactly, but a kind of unfamiliarity, like someone hearing a word in their own language that they had forgotten existed. "All right," he said and left. The children looked at her across the table. "Are you going to rearrange everything?" Cole said. He said it the way 8-year-olds say things they've been thinking about since they woke up, with the directness that adult their whole lives learning to soften. Some things, Clara said honestly. The pantry needs organizing, or half of what's in there will spoil before you use it. Kitchen shelf by the window could be better arranged. I won't touch anything I don't have to. Mama kept the good dishes in the left cupboard, Mara said quietly. The ones with the blue flowers. Then that's where they'll stay, Clara said. Mara looked at her plate. She didn't let us use them except Sunday. I won't use them either then. That was not, technically, the right answer. Clara knew it, even as she said it. The right answer, the easy one, would have been something warm and reassuring about how the dishes were meant to be used, and how their mother would have wanted them to have nice things. But that was not her place to say. She did not know what Ellen Mercer would have wanted. She was not about to pretend she did. The morning's work was the house, and the house was considerable. She had seen it the evening before in the particular slant of late light that reveals everything: the dust that had accumulated in the window corners, the cobwebs that had colonized the ceiling of the back room, pile of mending that had grown past the basket and spread onto the chair beside it. A house in grief looks different from a dirty house. A dirty house has a laziness to it. A house in grief has a specific kind of paralysis, where things stop not because no one cares, but because caring about them requires more energy than anyone has left. Clara understood this from the inside. She had watched her mother's house start to slip in the last year, when the illness had taken too much, and there was too little of Clara to cover everything. She had learned to triage what mattered today, what could wait longer. Started with what couldn't wait. The back porch had a pile of laundry that had been washed but not dealt with, folded badly, and left in a basket that had then been rained on at some point, leaving everything faintly musty. She hauled it out and hung it properly on the line in the morning sun, and went back for the mending basket. The mending basket was the thing she had not touched the day before. She looked at it now in the light of the second morning, and understood that it was not really a basket of mending. It was a record of a life, the small cotton square. Someone had started hemming and left mid-stitch. The child's shirt with the torn pocket that had been waiting for a patient hand. She went through it piece by piece, slowly, and sorted what was salvageable from what was not. And she set aside the piece that had the needle still in it, Ellen Mercer's last unfinished work, and put it carefully at the bottom of the basket, and covered it with a piece of cloth. It was not her place to throw that away. Possibly it was nobody's place yet. Cole appeared in the doorway of the back room while she was working. He leaned against the frame with his arms crossed, which was apparently his default posture, the crossed arms serving as the outward architecture of the barrier he was maintaining between himself and the world. "You're going through Mama's things," he said. "I'm going through the mending basket," Clara said. "There are clothes in here that still fit you. They just need fixing." She was going to do that. Clara did not look up from the seam she was examining. "I know. It should have been her doing it." "It should have been," Clara agreed. The plainness of it seemed to catch him slightly off guard, the absence of a softer answer, a redirecting answer. She let the silence sit. "Cole, I'm not trying to erase anything. I'm trying to get your shirt fixed so you don't have a pocket flapping for the rest of the summer." Stood there a moment longer. He did not say anything else. But he also did not leave immediately, which was, she had decided to count these things in their smallest denominations, something. The ranch itself, she learned over the course of that week, was shaped like a life interrupted. The vegetable garden behind the house had been started the previous spring, and then largely abandoned, half the beds choked with weeds, the rest dried out from inconsistent watering. Chicken Coop had 6 hens and a rooster who had developed, in the absence of regular human attention, an opinion of himself that exceeded his actual standing. Barn was in better shape than the house, because Wyatt had kept that up, the animals being a matter of livelihood rather than comfort. But the fences needed work on the south side, and the well rope was fraying and needed replacing before it didn't, and the wood pile, while substantial, stacked in a way that was going to make it difficult to access in winter. Clara made notes. Not to present to Wyatt as criticism, she was careful about this, but because her mind organized itself through lists, and because she understood that the ranch's disorder was not stupidity or laziness, but the predictable result of one person trying to hold a cattle operation together while raising 2 grieving children and not sleeping enough. She had seen how he came in at the end of the day, the specific kind of exhaustion that was not just physical, that came from spending all day in motion to avoid thinking about what you'd come home to find. She tackled the garden on the 3rd day, starting with the beds that could still be saved. It was hot work, and she was not, despite what Chester Holt had imagined, someone who had spent much time in actual garden labor. Her mother's house in Ohio had a small kitchen garden, manageable enough, and by mid-morning she was sweating through her dress in a way that felt deeply unladylike and entirely necessary. Mara came out and sat on the fence and watched. Clara let her watch for a while before saying anything. Mara was, she had noticed, a watcher. She processed things through observation before she engaged, which was a particular kind of intelligence that adults often mistook for shyness. Clara had been told she was shy as a child. She had not been shy. She had been careful. "You could help," Clara said, not looking up from the weeding. "If you wanted to." A pause. "What would I do?" "You see those onion plants on the end? They need to be thinned out. You pull the small ones so the bigger ones have room to grow." Mara climbed off the fence and came over and crouched down beside the onion row and looked at it with a seriousness that Clara was coming to recognize as characteristic. "How do you know which ones are small?" "Pick the one that looks least likely to survive on its own," Clara said. "Leave the ones that look like they've decided to stick around." Mara pulled a thin onion sprout, then another. She worked in silence for a while, and Clara worked beside her, and the morning got hotter, and a crow landed on the fence post and then reconsidered. "Did you have a garden?" Mara asked. "Where you came from?" "A small one. My mother kept it." "Is your mother still there?" Clara kept her hands moving. "My mother died last year." Mara was quiet. "Then I'm sorry, thank you," Clara said. "I know what that word means coming from you." She felt the girl look at her, not a quick glance, but a real look, the kind that considers. And then Mara went back to the onions, and they kept working and did not say anything else for a while. But the silence was a different shape than it had been. Cole was harder. He was not cruel. She wanted to be accurate about this. He did not do the things that some grieving children did, the active sabotage, the open hostility. He was simply resistant in the way of something that has decided not to attach, the way a plant sometimes will not root, no matter how good the soil is, because it has already spent everything it had on surviving the transplanting. He came when called. He ate what she put in front of him. He answered direct questions with direct answers of the minimum possible length. But when she was in the room, he arranged himself so that he was not quite looking at her, always at a slight angle, as though she were something bright that would hurt to look at directly. On the fourth day, she found him in the barn in the middle of the afternoon, sitting in the corner of an empty stall with a small knife and a piece of wood, whittling. It was not a good piece of whittling. The wood was the wrong kind, too hard, and his knife was a folding blade that wasn't made for the task, but he was working at it with the kind of concentration that is really just a container for something else. Clara did not say anything about the whittling. She said, "I need to know where your father keeps the extra lamp oil. He said we were out, but I found one can in the barn. Is that the only one?" Cole looked up. The question was practical. It did not require anything from him emotionally, and she could see him relax slightly, the way a person does when they realize they're being asked to navigate a map instead of their own feelings. "There might be another one on the top shelf by the tack room. Pa keeps things in two places sometimes." "That's useful," Clara said. "Thank you." And she went to look, and she found the oil, and she did not make anything more of the exchange. That evening at supper, Cole ate 2 servings of the bean soup she had made with the salt pork and the last of the dried beans, which she counted as progress of the specific, unspoken kind. Town did not forget about her. She had not expected it to. Red Hollow was a small place, and small places have long memories, particularly for stories that have a satisfying shape, and the mail-order bride who got turned down by all 3 men and ended up a ranch housekeeper had a shape that people found satisfying in the way of a cautionary tale or confirmation of something they'd already believed. Clara heard it secondhand from Wyatt, who mentioned it without inflection one evening when he came in late from town. He had needed to pick up supplies and had been told, at the general store, with the specific cheerfulness of someone delivering news they find entertaining, that folks were wondering how the Bennett woman was getting on. "What did you tell them?" Clara said. She was at the stove and did not turn around. "I told them you'd fixed the south fence gate, reorganized the pantry, and made the best biscuits I'd had in over a year," Wyatt said. Clara turned around. He was sitting at the table with his boots still on, which was the only slovenly habit she had observed in him, and which she had decided to let alone for now, because some battles were not worth having in the first week. He was looking at the table. She could not see his expression clearly. "You said that," she said. "It's what you'd done." He looked up. The biscuits especially were accurate. Mara told me they were the best she'd ever had, and Mara doesn't exaggerate. Clara turned back to the stove. Her face was doing something she didn't particularly want him to see. Mara is 8 years old. Her frame of reference is limited. She's a good judge, Wyatt said. She takes after her mother. It was the most he had said about Ellen without being asked, and Clara heard the present tense of it, takes after, not took after, and understood that this was how grief worked in some people. The refusal to fully relegate someone to the past tense. She let it alone. They said other things, Wyatt continued. Not with bitterness exactly, but with the flatness of someone reporting weather. About it being irregular. A single woman at a ranch without being married, Clara said. Yes. Does it concern you, she said. Kept her voice even. She was not asking because she would change anything about her presence here if the answer was yes. She was asking because she needed to understand what she was working with. Wyatt was quiet for a moment. No, he said. I've had a harder time not caring what Red Hollow thinks than I expected. After. He stopped. After everything. But the children need what they need, and what they need isn't me trying to manage the town's opinion. He rubbed the back of his neck. I just thought you should know what they were saying. I already knew, Clara said. Women always know that kind of thing. He didn't answer, but he didn't have to. The days found a rhythm, the way days do when people are too busy to fight the current. Clara was up before the children, the kitchen going by the time they came down. Kept the house, managed the food stores with the precision of someone rationing limited resources, worked the garden, managed the hens, and spent portions of the afternoon with the children when Wyatt was out and they needed someone who wasn't the wall. She did not push. She did not perform. She was simply there consistently, which she had decided was the only thing that might work with Cole and possibly with all of them. The Sunday she had asked for came, and Wyatt did not forget it. He told her at Saturday supper that he would manage the children in the morning, if she wanted to take the wagon into town, and she said she didn't need the wagon. She'd prefer to walk if it wasn't too far, and he said it was 3 miles, and she said that was fine. She walked in the morning cool, alone, down the road she had ridden with him a week ago, and she felt the specific pleasure of solitude that is only really felt by people who don't have much of it, the way the quiet opened up around her, the way her thoughts spread out like they'd been held in a small space. She did not go to the church. She sat beside the creek at the edge of town, in the shade of a cottonwood, and wrote in her notebook, and ate the biscuit she had brought, and watched the water. She thought about Ohio, about her mother's house, about the specific smell of the kitchen there, and the way the light came through the east window in winter. She thought about the 3 men on the platform, and she was surprised to find that the memory had already started to change, still humiliating, still sharp, but slightly more distant, like something seen from a moving wagon. She was still angry. She recognized this as a thing she was carrying around, tamped down under the work and the practicality, the anger of a woman who has been assessed and found wanting by men who had no accurate measure for her. She let herself feel it by the creek for a while. It was not pretty, and she was not proud of it, and she also thought it was exactly right to feel it. On the walk back, she was passed by a buggy going the other direction toward town. Stopped, and the woman holding the reins looked down at her with the frank evaluation of someone accustomed to making quick judgments. "You're the Bennett woman," she said. It was not a question. The one out at the Mercer place. "Clara Bennett," Clara said. "Yes, Harriet Kroll." The woman had a broad face, wind-burned, and the kind of eyes that didn't waste movement. "I live on the property east of Mercer's. Been meaning to come over," she paused. "How are those children?" "They're managing," Clara said carefully. "Mara's helping in the garden. Cole's finding his way." Harriet Kroll looked at her for a moment, longer than was comfortable, the particulars of someone's taking a measurement. "Ellen was a good woman," she said. "Wyatt took it hard. The children took it harder." "I imagine," Clara said. "Half the town thinks you shouldn't be there," Harriet said, with the directness of someone who finds diplomacy inefficient. "The other half is grateful someone is." Clara met her eyes. "Which half are you?" The corner of Harriet Kroll's mouth moved. "I brought a chicken pie over in January, and it sat on their porch because no one answered the door. I brought it back home and ate it myself." She clicked at the horse. "I'm glad someone's answering the door now." She drove on. Clara walked the last mile back to the ranch with the specific feeling of having been offered something that was not quite warmth, but was in the same neighborhood, the frontier equivalent of acceptance, which was different from the kind she was used to, but possibly more durable. Trouble with Cole came to a head on a Tuesday 12 days into her time at the ranch. She had, as she did each day, spent the after-lunch hour with both children, not structured, not forced, just the presence of an adult who was available. Mara was working on her reading, a habit Clara had discovered and immediately supported, providing the younger girl with a book from her own small collection that she had brought in her trunk. Cole was supposed to be doing arithmetic, a sheet of figures Wyatt had indicated the children were meant to work through. He was not doing arithmetic. He was sitting at the table with a face like a closed door, the paper in front of him untouched. Cole, Clara said from across the room, the figures. I don't see why. Because your father asked you to do them. Pa's not here, Cole said, with the logic of someone who has found a loophole. No, Clara said, I am. She heard what she'd said the same moment he did the implication in it, the I am here, and waited to see how he would take it. He looked at her for the first time in what felt like days, a full direct look with no angle to it, and what was in his face was not quite anger. Or not only anger, there was something underneath the anger that was younger and more frightened. You're not Mama, he said. I know that, Clara said. I'm not trying to be. I'm Miss Bennett, and I'm telling you to do your figures. Miss Bennett doesn't tell me what to do. When your father isn't here and I'm the adult in this house, Miss Bennett absolutely does, Clara said. Her voice was even. She was not going to win this by getting louder, and she was not going to win it by backing down, and she was going to have to find a third option. Cole, I know you're angry. I think you've been angry for a long time, and that you've got reasons for it that have nothing to do with arithmetic or with me. I'm not asking you to stop being angry. I'm asking you to do the figures. Stared at her. His jaw was set like his father's jaw, the same line, and she could see in him so clearly the man he was going to be stubborn and loyal and capable of great feeling that he would try to manage by refusing to show it. I don't want you here, he said. I know, Clara said. I didn't ask you to come. Nobody asked me, she said. Came anyway, and I'm staying, and I'm sorry that's hard for you, and I need you to do your figures. He dropped his eyes to the paper. She watched him pick up the pencil. He did not look at her again, but he started working through the arithmetic with the stiff, deliberate motions of someone performing an act of surrender that they refused to acknowledge as surrender. Mara did not look up from her book, but Clara saw her shoulders, which had been raised slightly, come down. That evening, Wyatt came in to find Clara sitting at the kitchen table after supper, mending the shirt of Cole's that had been in the basket, the one with the torn pocket. The children were in bed. The lamp was low. He stood in the doorway for a moment before she heard him. You don't have to do that tonight, he said. I know, she said. I do things when I'm thinking. He came in and got the last of the coffee from the pot and sat at the table, not directly across from her at the end, which was a position that said, I'm here but not intruding. And she noticed this about him, the way he was careful about spatial presumption, the way he seemed to understand without being told that a woman in her position needed room that was not constantly being pressed on. Cole was better tonight, he said. He's a good boy, Clara said. He's protecting something. That takes work. He's protecting his mother, Wyatt said. He wrapped both hands around his cup and looked at it. Thinks if he lets things change, lets things get easier, it means she mattered less. Clara set down the mending. Is that what you think? Wyatt was quiet long enough that she knew he was actually considering it and not just looking for a polite answer. Sometimes, he said, it's harder to let yourself feel all right than it is to keep feeling terrible. Feeling terrible is at least still about her. Yes, Clara said. It is. He looked up at her then, and she wondered if he had expected her to argue with him, to say the kinds of things people say about moving forward and not living in the past, and what Ellen would have wanted. She had not said those things. She had not said them, because she did not know what Ellen would have wanted, and also because she had learned that grief did not want instruction. It wanted witnessing. You've been here 2 weeks, Wyatt said. 12 days. The house looks different. He said it not as a compliment, exactly, but as an observation, someone noting a change and trying to understand what it means. It smells different, like something that's being used again. Clara picked the mending back up. A house needs to be used, she said. It goes bad otherwise. Like anything that sits still too long. Wyatt drank his coffee. The lamp flickered once and steadied. Outside, the wind that came every night at this hour moved through the cottonwoods, and Clara listened to it, and did not say anything else, and neither did he. And the silence between them was, she took its measure carefully, not uncomfortable. The gossip from town arrived the following week, in a form she had not anticipated, not through a third party, but directly, in the form of a woman named Dora Pell, who drove out from Red Hollow on a Wednesday morning, under the pretense of returning a pot she had borrowed from the Mercer household some months before, and who spent 45 minutes in the kitchen assessing Clara with the systematic thoroughness of someone conducting an official inspection. Dora Pell was the wife of the man who ran the general store, and she had, in Clara's estimation, both more energy and more leisure than she knew what to do with. She asked questions that were not quite questions, the kind that come wrapped in friendly concern, but have a harder edge inside, about whether Clara found it difficult, being in the house, being unmarried, being so far from whatever she'd come from, whether the children were warming up to her, or whether it was still awkward. Clara answered each question with complete accuracy and minimum elaboration, and offered Dora Pell a cup of coffee and 2 of the good biscuits, and watched the woman's visible conflict between her appetite for gossip and her appetite for biscuits, and felt the outcome was never really in question. When Dora left, Clara stood on the porch and watched the buggy go, and then went inside and scrubbed the already clean countertop, because she needed to do something with her hands. Mara appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had heard most of it. "She's always like that," Mara said. "I suspected," Clara said. "Mama used to call her a weather vane. She turns whichever way the wind blows." Mara paused. "I think that means she changes what she says depending on who she's with." "That's exactly what it means," Clara said. "Your mother was accurate." Mara came in and sat at the table. She had brought her book. She sat there reading while Clara worked, and it was the most natural thing that had happened in 12 days. 2 people in a kitchen on a Wednesday morning, each doing their own thing, neither performing anything for the other. It was, Clara thought, what home actually felt like. Not the occasion of it, the ordinary middle of it. She was still not certain she belonged here. She was still aware daily of her position, not the wife, not the neighbor, not someone with a claim beyond the $2 a week and the room off the kitchen. She was still the woman Red Hollow found irregular and faintly amusing. She was still sleeping in a small room that was not hers, and eating food she had cooked herself in a kitchen that had someone else's mending basket in the corner. She was also the woman who had fixed the fence gate and cleaned out the pantry and gotten Cole to do his figures and spent a morning on her knees in the garden with Mara and talked to Harriet Kroll on the road and weathered Dora Pell's inspection and made by general agreement of a small and limited audience the best biscuits anyone had tasted in over a year. She could work with that. The 19th day brought a letter, forwarded from the Prairie Rest Hotel, where Mrs. Hatch had apparently understood she was now to be found. It was from her sister in Ohio, 3 pages of close writing, asking about the arrangements, about the men, about whether Clara had found what she'd gone looking for. Clara sat in her small room with the letter and read it twice and tried to figure out how to answer it honestly. She had found work and a roof, and 2 children who were cautiously, reluctantly, at their own speed, beginning to let her be present in their lives. She had found a rancher who treated her like a person with a functional mind, and enough respect not to explain things to her that she already understood. She had found a frontier that was nothing like what she'd pictured, harder, dirtier, hotter, lonelier, and that she was, against her expectations, not entirely sorry to be in. She had not found what she'd come looking for. She was no longer entirely sure she had known what she was looking for when she packed her trunk in Ohio. She wrote back 1 page. She said, "I am well. The work is hard and the children need me, and the country is something I am still getting used to. I will write more when I know more. For now I am staying." She sealed the envelope and left it on the kitchen table for Wyatt to take to town. And she went to start supper, and through the window she could see Cole in the yard, sitting against the barn wall, with his piece of wood and his inadequate knife, and Mara on the fence watching him, and the light going golden across all of it, in the way that prairie light does in the hour before dark. And Clara stood at the window for just a moment before she turned back to the stove. She had been underestimated before. She had been turned away before. She had stood in that alley in Red Hollow, with nothing but $3 and her own stubbornness. And she had come out of it with something, not what she'd planned, but something. She was not naive enough to think it would hold together easily. Nothing in her experience held together easily. The ranch needed more work than one person's 12 days could accomplish, and Cole's resistance was not gone, only temporarily shifted, and Wyatt Mercer was a man who wore his grief the way some men wore heavy coats, protective, necessary, not coming off anytime soon. She had $2 a week and a room off the kitchen, and no promises about any of it. But the stove was warm, and the biscuits were good, and the children were outside in the last of the light. And for now, for today, she was staying. The letter to her sister sat on Clara's mind longer than she expected. Not because of what she had written, the single page had been accurate enough if compressed, but because of what writing it had forced her to acknowledge. She had told her sister she was staying. She had written it plainly, without qualification, and the act of writing it had made it true in a way that merely thinking it had not. She was staying. In a room off a kitchen on a cattle ranch 7 miles from a town that found her irregular, working for a widower she had known for less than 3 weeks, caring for 2 children who had not asked for her any more than she had asked for them. She had made stranger decisions in her life, though at the moment she could not immediately recall what they were. The 4th week settled into the ranch the way weather settles in gradually and then completely. The rhythm she and Wyatt had found in the evenings continued. He came in from the work of the day. She put food on the table, the children ate, and afterward, in the hour before the lamp needed conserving, there was sometimes conversation and sometimes not, and both were acceptable. She had stopped measuring the silences for hostility and started accepting them as the furniture of a house where people were getting used to each other. Cole remained the problem she could not quite solve, and she had stopped trying to solve him quickly. This was something she had learned from her mother's illness, that there were situations where the only productive thing was patience and the willingness to still be there when the other person finally turned around. Cole was going to turn around on his own schedule. She could not accelerate it. She could only not be gone when it happened. What she had not anticipated was Mara. In the calculus of the first weeks, she had thought of Mara as the easier child, the one who had at least acknowledged her presence, who had helped in the garden, who had told her about the blue dishes and the candy shelf and the weather-vane nature of Dora Pell with a directness that was its own form of trust. She had not thought of Mara as someone who needed watching. She should have. It started on a Thursday evening in the 5th week, late enough in September that the temperature dropped seriously at night, and Clara had begun banking the kitchen stove before bed. Mara had been quieter than usual at supper. Clara noticed this without remarking on it, filing it under children have moods, and there is no emergency here. Wyatt had noticed too. She could tell from the way he looked at his daughter once or twice across the table, the slight adjustment in his posture that meant he was paying closer attention than he appeared to be. But Mara ate her portion and answered the few questions directed at her and went up to bed at the regular time, and Clara thought nothing more of it. She was wrong to think nothing more of it. She heard it at 2:30 in the morning, a sound from upstairs that was not quite a cry and not quite a cough, but something between the two, something that pulled her out of sleep with the immediacy of an alarm. She lay still for a moment, listening. The sound came again. She was out of her bed before she had made any conscious decision to be. Mara's room was at the top of the stairs, the small room at the front of the house that had probably been a nursery once, and was still too small for a child who was 8 and growing. Clara pushed the door open and found Mara on her side in the bed, her blanket twisted, her dark hair plastered to her face with sweat. Clara put her hand on the child's forehead and felt the heat before she had finished the motion. It was significant. That was what she registered first, not panic, but the specific measuring assessment of someone who has been through this before. Her hand went from Mara's forehead to her cheek, to the back of her neck, running the calibration of experience. The fever was high. She could not say how high. She had no thermometer, which she added to the list of things the ranch needed that she had not yet gotten around to, but her hand told her what she needed to know for the moment, which was that this was not a mild night fever that rest would fix. "Mara," she said, "can you hear me?" Mara made a sound. Her eyes opened partway, unfocused, and then closed again. Clara went back to the stairs. She said, at a volume that was not a shout, but would carry through a closed door, "Mr. Mercer." Nothing for a moment. Then the creak of his bed and his feet on the floor and his door, and he appeared at the top of the stairs in his trousers and shirt, his hair pushed up on one side, reading her face immediately. "Mara," he said. It was not a question. "Fever," Clara said. "Come." He was in the room before she had finished the word. Crouched beside the bed and put his hand on his daughter's face, and Clara watched something move through him, the specific terror of a parent, which is different from every other kind of fear in that it has no place to put itself, no action it can take that feels adequate. "How bad," he said. "Bad enough that we need to bring it down and watch her through the night," Clara said. "What's the nearest doctor?" Wyatt looked up Harlan. "Day's ride, maybe a little less if you push. Can you get someone to go?" "I'd have to go myself. I can't send—" He stopped. The question that was in both their minds was if he went, who stayed. "Go in the morning," Clara said. "Right now I need you to get me cold water from the well, as cold as it comes, and I need every spare cloth in this house. And I need you to tell me if she's been sick before and how she ran it." He looked at her for a second, the kind of look that asks whether someone knows what they're doing, the kind that is not disrespectful, but simply necessary. Clara held his gaze and let him take his measure. "She gets high fevers when she's sick," he said. Ellen always, he stopped. "She always kept her cool and hydrated." Said that was the thing. "Your wife was right," Clara said. "Go get the water," he went. Clara turned back to Mara and began working. She had done this before. That was the fact she held on to, through the hours that followed, the way you hold on to a rope in water, not because the rope is comfortable, but because it is the only thing keeping you from the current. She had sat through 4 nights of high fever with her mother in the last winter. When the illness had put in that particular effort, and she had learned in those nights the specific discipline of a fever watch, what to do, what not to do, what the signs were that meant improvement, and what the signs were that meant the other thing. She got Mara's dress changed for a lighter one and got the child's hair back and off her neck. When Wyatt came with the first bucket of water, she soaked the cloths and put them on Mara's forehead, her neck, the insides of her wrists, and showed Wyatt how often to change them, not letting them warm up, keeping the exchange constant. She got water down Mara when the child was conscious enough to swallow, not forcing it, working with the moments of clarity that came in waves. Cole appeared in the doorway at some point near midnight. He was in his nightshirt, his feet bare on the cold boards, his face holding an expression she had not seen on him before, the stripped-back face of a child who has taken off every defense because what he's afraid of is too large for the defenses to do anything about. "Is she going to die?" he said. The bluntness of it, the rawness of it, hit Clara somewhere she had not expected. "Not if I can help it," she said, and she meant it with every practical bone in her body, and she hoped that the practical certainty of it would reach him better than a softer answer would have. Cole did not go back to bed. He came and sat in the corner of the room, his back against the wall, his knees drawn up, and he stayed there. Clara did not tell him to leave. She did not tell him this was fine, or that everything would be all right, because the night was not at a point where she could honestly say those things. What she could say and did was, "Help me wring out this cloth." He got up. He wrung out the cloth a little clumsily and handed it to her. And then he sat back down in his corner, and the three of them, Wyatt, on the other side of the bed, Cole in his corner, Clara working, settled into the long labor of the night. There was nothing dramatic about it. That was the thing people who hadn't done this kind of nursing didn't understand, that it was not dramatic. It was relentless. Change the cloth, check the breathing, get water down when possible, watch the face for signs of change, start over. The drama was internal, in the fear that ran underneath everything and had to be managed like a second patient, because if you let it take over, you became useless, and you could not afford to be useless. Around 2 in the morning, Mara became briefly more agitated, moving restlessly, pulling at her blanket, saying things that made no sense. Clara felt Wyatt tense across the bed and said, without looking up, "This is normal. It's not worse. Stay with what we're doing." "How do you know?" he said, and his voice was taut with the effort of not making it more than a question. "Because I've been through this before, and the alternative looks different," Clara said. "Trust me for the next hour." There was a pause. He said. That was the moment. Though she did not register it as a moment until later, the moment he said all right and meant it in the way of someone genuinely handing something over, not because he had run out of options, but because he had decided to trust her judgment. It was a different thing entirely from simply having no other choice. She made him sleep for an hour, somewhere around 3, made him leave the room and lie down on the hallway floor with his back against the wall because he needed something, even that, and he was going to be no good to anyone by morning if he did not stop burning through his reserves on fear alone. She did not raise her voice. She simply continued with what she was doing and said, "I will call you immediately if anything changes. I have done this before. Go," he went. Cole stayed in his corner, awake, and sometime around 4 in the morning, when the change was happening gradually, the fever's architecture beginning to shift, terrible dry heat of it easing very slightly the edges, Cole got up from his corner and came to stand beside Clara at the head of the bed. He stood there for a moment, looking at his sister's face. "She looks a little better," he said. It was tentative, half a question. "She does," Clara said carefully. "It's moving in the right direction." Cole was quiet. He was so close that she could feel him standing there, the warmth of him, 8 years old and frightened and trying not to show it. Then, without any announcement, he sat down on the edge of the bed on the other side of Mara's feet. drew up his knees, and leaned his back against the footboard. He did not ask permission. He did not look at Clara. He just sat there, keeping his sister company in the way of someone who has finally found the only thing they actually know how to do in this situation. Clara let him sit. She kept changing the cloths and watching Mara's breathing and listening to the night sounds of the house around them, the wind in the cottonwoods, the distant sound of one of the horses moving in the barn, the slow tick of the cooling stove downstairs. Called Wyatt back at 4:30 because she needed him to see it for himself, the slight color change, the breathing that had found a steadier rhythm, the fact that Mara had not been agitated in over an hour. Came in and crouched beside the bed and looked at his daughter for a long time. His hand went to her forehead. He kept it there. "It's breaking," Clara said. He did not say anything for a moment. When he did, his voice had done something Clara had not heard from him. Before it had gone rough, not controlled. "Sure, I'm not a doctor," Clara said. "But yes, I'm sure." He kept his hand on Mara's forehead. Cole was still at the foot of the bed, listing slightly sideways now, with the particular bonelessness of a child fighting sleep. Wyatt looked at his son and then at Clara, and what passed across his face was not easy to name. It was too many things at once. Relief and exhaustion, and something that looked like it had been clenched shut for a long time, and was considering cautiously opening. "You should get a couple hours," Clara said quietly. "I'll stay until full light. The fever's still there, but it's changed direction. She needs hydration more than anything else now." "I can stay," Wyatt said. "Can," Clara agreed. "But one of us needs to be functional when the doctor gets here, and I'm past the hard part. Go." He looked at her again with that assessing look, the one she had come to recognize, not distrust, but the careful observation of a man who is learning who someone is and is not yet finished learning. Then he stood. He looked at Cole, who had given up the fight and was asleep sideways against the footboard. "Leave him," Clara said. "He'll get cold. I'll get the blanket." She did. She got the spare blanket from the chest at the end of the hallway and draped it over Cole without waking him, and he shifted slightly in his sleep and then settled, and for a moment Clara stood there looking at both of them, the sleeping boy and the sick girl, and the weak pre-dawn light beginning to seep under the curtain, and felt the specific, bone-level exhaustion of someone who has been running on purpose alone for 6 hours. She sat in the chair beside the bed, and she kept watch. The doctor arrived in the late morning, a lean man of 60 named Dr. Harlan Foss, who had the brisk confidence of someone who had made this kind of ride too many times to find it remarkable. Wyatt had ridden at first light and had made good time, and Dr. Foss came back with him on a fresh horse from the exchange station halfway, arriving at the Mercer ranch close to 11 with his bag and his unhurried manner. He examined Mara thoroughly, and Clara stood in the doorway and answered his questions when the fever had started, how high she had estimated it, what intervention she had used, how long it had taken to see the first signs of breaking, and he listened with the concentrated attention of someone sorting relevant information from irrelevant at high speed. "Kept her hydrated," he said. It was somewhere between a question and a confirmation. "As much as she would take," Clara said. "Every hour she was conscious enough. Cool compresses, consistent." "Yes." Dr. Foss looked at her over his spectacles. "Who taught you?" "Experience," Clara said. "My mother had a long illness." He held her gaze for a moment. "You did the right things," he said. "All of them, in the right order." He looked back at Mara, who was sleeping properly now, genuinely sleeping, not the restless, half-conscious state of the high fever. "She's through the worst. She'll need a week in bed and light food and water, more water than she wants. Watch for it returning, sometimes it cycles. If it goes back up hard in the next 48 hours, send for me immediately." "I will," Clara said. He snapped his bag shut and turned to Wyatt, who was in the doorway behind her, and said something about the specifics of recovery that Clara only half heard because she was looking at Mara's face, the small, ordinary face of a sleeping child, without the fever's distortion, without the terrible blankness of those worst hours. Just a girl sleeping in her bed. Clara went downstairs and made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table and drank it, and her hand shook slightly around the cup, which she had not expected. She had been steady through all of it, steady during the night, steady during the hours of worst uncertainty, steady when Wyatt needed steadiness and when Cole needed it, and now, with the crisis resolved and the doctor's confirmation sitting in the air, her body was taking the opportunity to register what it had been carrying. She sat with the shaking hands until they stopped. She did not cry, though she was close to it, not from grief, but from the specific physical release of sustained tension. She drank her coffee. She ate a biscuit she didn't particularly want because she had not eaten since supper the previous night. Dr. Foss left with his fee, which Wyatt paid from what Clara recognized as the household's last spare cash. And Wyatt came back into the kitchen and stood at the counter and did not say anything for a moment. "Cole's still up there," he said finally. "He slept a few hours. He'll be all right. He stayed all night, he did." Wyatt turned around and looked at Clara at the table with her coffee cup and her steadied hands. His face was complicated in the way that faces are when they are trying to hold too many things and not quite managing it. He had not slept more than 2 hours, and it showed the shadows. Under his eyes were deep, and there was a tightness in his jaw from hours of controlled fear. And he looked, she thought, like a man who has been reminded of exactly what he has to lose. He said. It was the first time he had used her given name. Stopped on it, seemingly not entirely sure what was meant to follow it. She waited. "Thank you," he said. And then, after a pause that had weight to it, "I don't know what would have—" He stopped again. "Don't go there," she said, not unkindly. "She's all right. Stay in that." He looked at her for a moment, and then he nodded. A single definitive nod, the kind that says "message received," and also "I am choosing to accept that instruction because I need to." Pulled out the chair across from her and sat down heavily. "There's coffee," Clara said. "I know. Do you want some?" "Yes," he said. "Please." She got up and poured it and put it in front of him and sat back down, and they sat across from each other at the kitchen table. In the aftermath of the night, both of them worn to the essential, the way long emergencies strip everything down to what actually remains. "The doctor said you did everything right," Wyatt said. Kind, he wasn't being kind. Harlan Fossey isn't kind by nature. He was being accurate. He wrapped his hands around the cup. "Where did you learn it?" "My mother was sick for almost 2 years," Clara said. "The last winter was the bad one. We were in Ohio, and the nearest doctor was close enough. But close enough in Ohio is different from close enough out here. And there were nights where close enough didn't mean he could come. You learn what you need to learn." Wyatt was quiet. "How old were you when she died?" 25, Clara said. "She died in February. I left in July. That's why you came west." "Partly," Clara said. "There wasn't much left to stay for. The house was sold. My sister has her own family." She looked at the grain of the table, thought a husband, a home of my own, a fresh start. The arithmetic of it seemed clear. And then Red Hollow, Wyatt said. There was something in his voice that was not quite irony but was in the family. And then Red Hollow, Clara agreed. He looked at her across the table, and she looked back at him. And it was a long enough look that it crossed the boundary from informational into something else not uncomfortable, but noted. Like a door that had been slightly ajar for a while and had now opened a little further. Cole's feet on the stairs broke it. He appeared in the kitchen doorway looking thoroughly slept in, his hair at angles, his face carrying the specific blank aftermath of a child who cried while he was sleeping and doesn't quite remember it. "She's still sleeping," he reported to no one in particular. "That's what she needs to do," Clara said. Cole looked at his father, then at Clara. He went to the shelf where the hard candy was and stood there for a moment, his back to both of them. "She's going to be all right," he said. It was not quite a question. "Yes," Clara said, "she is." Cole took a piece of candy. He turned around and looked at Clara with an expression she had not seen from him before. Not warmth, not forgiveness, not any of the things she had been waiting for patiently without letting herself wait. It was something more precise than those. It was recognition. He looked at her the way you look at someone when you understand for the first time that they are actually there, that they are actually real, that what they did was an actual thing that happened, and not something you can continue to arrange yourself to ignore. Then he said, "Are you going to make breakfast?" Clara felt something move through her that she chose not to examine in detail. "Yes," she said. "Go wash your hands," he went. She got up and went to the stove. Mara's recovery was slow and querulous in the way that recoveries from serious fever always are. The patient feels better before they are better, and then feels terrible again, and cycles between wanting company and wanting silence, and wanting specific things that no one can quite provide. Clara managed it without complaint, bringing water and broth and light toast when the stomach was ready for it, reading to Mara in the afternoons when the girl was awake enough to listen, sitting in the chair by the window when she was not. Wyatt came up every evening. He would sit on the edge of the bed and talk to Mara in the quiet voice he seemed to reserve for her. Not the careful, measured voice he used with most people, but something lower, more direct, less filtered. Clara tried not to listen, but the room was small. She heard him tell Mara about the horses and the fence work, and what Cole had said that morning that had made him laugh in spite of himself, and she heard Mara say, "On the third day, Miss Bennett stayed all night, Papa. She did, Wyatt said. She didn't leave, even when it was really bad. No, Wyatt said she didn't. A pause. I thought she would, Mara said. Leave, I mean. Cole said she would. Cole said a lot of things. Wyatt said, and his tone was careful, not dismissive. He doesn't say them anymore, Mara said. And then with the unfiltered precision of a child who has not yet learned to soften her observations, I think last night changed something. Clara did not say anything. She looked out the window at the late afternoon light on the cottonwood leaves. Sleep, Wyatt said to Mara. You can analyze things when you're better. Mara laughed a small sound, weaker than it would usually be, but real. Clara heard it and thought, there it is. There she is. The week of recovery brought other things alongside the slow progress of Mara's health. Harriet Kroll came by on the Thursday with a pot of chicken soup and no pretense of any other reason for visiting which Clara respected. She sat at the kitchen table with Clara for 20 minutes while the soup heated and said, without any particular ceremony, I heard Fossey say you managed it right. All of it. He said I did the right things, Clara said. Difference. Not from where I'm standing. Harriet wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. She did this the same way Wyatt did. Clara noticed both hands, like they were holding something precious or heavy. Ellen was my friend, she said. Clara looked at her. Not my closest friend, Harriet said, but the kind of friend you have out here, where you don't have many. She was solid. You knew where you were with her. She paused. I'm not saying any of this to tell you what to be. I'm saying it because I think you should know that those children have people watching out for them, from a distance, and that what you did this week, what you did that night, it was seen. Clara was quiet for a moment. By whom? By enough people, Harriet said. Red Hollow talks about everything. It'll talk about this too. She stood and went to the pot on the stove. This ready? Nearly, Clara said. They stood at the stove together, and Clara thought about to be seen in a place that had looked at you and laughed, to have that same audience now watching from a different angle. She did not trust it entirely. People shifted like Dora Pell's weather vane, and one night of good nursing did not rebuild a reputation that had started in humiliation. She knew this, but it was something. It was the first something of a different kind. Cole found her in the garden on the Saturday, a week after the fever had broken, when Mara was up and moving slowly such around the house, and the crisis had fully passed into the past tense. Clara was harvesting the last of the beans before the real cold came, working down the row with a basket on her arm, and she heard him come across the yard and did not look up. Stood at the end of the row. I need to tell you something, he said. She kept working. All right. I told Mara you'd leave, he said, before she got sick. I said you were like the others and you'd leave. He paused. Told me you heard her say that she'd believed it. She didn't say it to hurt me, Clara said. I know. But I said it first. He was quiet. She could hear him working himself towards something, trying to make sure it was true. I kept thinking he stopped, started again. If I was mean enough, you'd go. And then it wouldn't matter whether you were good or not. Clara stopped working. She stood up and looked at him, at his freckled, sunburned face and his serious eyes, and the set that was always a little too old for the rest of him. Cole, she said, I know. He blinked. You knew? I've been 8 years old, she said. Not me exactly. But I know how it works. She held his gaze. You're trying to protect yourself. You're trying to protect Mara. You're trying to protect your father and your mother's memory, all at the same time. And you're 8, and that's too much to carry. His chin moved. Something in his face shifted. I'm not going anywhere, Clara said. Not today, and not because you're mean to me. If I ever go, it'll be for grown-up reasons that you'll understand when you're older. But I'm not planning to. She picked up her basket. And you don't have to like me. You don't have to be glad I'm here. You just have to be honest about it. Cole stood there. Help me finish the beans, Clara said. He didn't answer. But after a moment, he walked to the other end of the row and started picking, and the two of them worked down toward the middle from their opposite ends, and didn't say anything else. And the afternoon settled around them the way good afternoons do, when the hard thing has been said and there is nothing left to do but keep working. That evening at supper, Cole said, when Clara set the cornbread on the table, thank you, Miss Clara. It was the first time he had called her that. Not Miss Bennett, Miss Clara. The small shift in it, the tiny intimacy of the given name, landed somewhere in the room and stayed. Mara looked up from her plate. Wyatt looked at his son and then at Clara. Clara put the cornbread down. You're welcome, she said and sat. She did not make anything of it. She had learned that the things that mattered most in this house were the ones you made the least of, The ones you let sit in the room without explanation. The basin of cold water at 2 in the morning. The blanket over a sleeping boy. The second serving of bean soup eaten in silence. The first time a child says your name and means it. These were the things that were building something. She did not know yet exactly what they were building. She knew it was not what she had come to Red Hollow looking for, and she knew that what she had come looking for had turned out to be a smaller and more frightened version of what she actually needed. Outside, the cottonwood leaves were turning at their edges, the first real signal of the coming season. The days were shortening. The temperature dropped further at night. The ranch needed winterizing, and the woodpile needed to be restacked. And there were 100 things that had been waiting while Mara recovered. Clara made a list in her head, the way she always did, working forward from where they were. She was good at lists. She was good at looking at what was in front of her and figuring out the order of things. She had begun to admit to herself in the small hours of nights, like the one they had just been through, getting good at this particular life too. Not the life she had planned, the one she was in. October came in sideways, the way weather does on the Texas frontier, not gradually but all at once, as though the season had been waiting just over the horizon and finally decided it had been patient long enough. The temperature dropped 15 degrees in a single afternoon, and the wind that followed had teeth in it, and by the first week of the month, Clara had the kitchen stove going full by 7 in the morning, and the children were wearing their heavier clothes to breakfast. The ranch responded to the cold the way living things do, contracting, conserving, pulling inward. The garden was finished now, the last of the squash brought in and stored in the root cellar, alongside the potatoes, and the onions Clara had coaxed out of the neglected beds through the late summer. The woodpile had been restacked and was substantial enough to see them through a normal winter, though Clara had made a note in her mind about what a bad winter would require and filed it under things to raise with Wyatt when the time is right. The hens had slowed their laying, which was seasonal and expected, and the rooster had in some small way reconsidered his attitude toward Clara after she twice removed him from the kitchen steps with the methodical firmness of someone who did not find him impressive. Mara had come back to herself fully by the second week of October, the fever leaving behind only a slight pallor that the outdoor air was slowly erasing. She had returned to the garden and her reading and her habit of watching things before she engaged with them, but there was something different in how she watched Clara, now less cautious, less provisional, like a question that had been answered. Cole was different too, though he did not advertise the fact. He still did not talk much at meals, and he still carried himself with the crossed arms posture of someone maintaining a boundary that has become more habitual than necessary. But he said Miss Clara now with a naturalness that suggested he had forgotten he had ever said it any other way. Small things he told her when the water barrel was running low before she had to notice it herself. He came in from outside and reported, without being asked, that one of the fence rails on the south side was loose again. He started leaving his wood-carving pieces on the kitchen table when he came in for meals, not seeking comment exactly, but not hiding them either. She looked at them. She did not make a performance of it, did not exclaim over them in the way adults perform enthusiasm for children's work. She looked at them the way she would look at any object that interested her, which was with genuine attention. His work was rough, the wood still too hard for a folding knife, the shapes still finding themselves. But there was something in the proportions of the small horse he had been working on for 2 weeks that suggested his eye was good even when his tools were not. The legs are almost right, she told him one evening, picking it up. The back too are right. The fronts are a little long. He looked at it. I know, he said with mild irritation. I can't get the knife to go where I want. You need a different knife. I know that too. I'll put it on the supply list, Clara said, for when your father goes to town. Cole looked at her. Something shifted in his face, the same look she'd seen in the bean row, the recognition that she was paying attention to the actual thing and not the performance of paying attention. Okay, he said, and took the horse back and went to work on it again. She added it to the list. A carving knife, a good one, small enough for a child's hand. She put it between the lamp oil and the flour. Wyatt found the list on the kitchen shelf where she always left it and read through it in the way he always did, methodically, not reacting to individual items, treating it as information rather than instruction. But when he got to the carving knife, he stopped. He looked up at Clara, who was at the stove. Cole's been working on something, she said, without turning around. He needs the right tools for it. A pause. His mother got him that folding knife for his birthday, Wyatt said. Thinks it's the only one he's got. It's not the right blade for carving, Clara said. He knows it too. He's been fighting the wood for 2 months. She heard him fold the list. I'll get one, he said. And she heard in his voice what she was beginning to recognize as his particular form of gratitude, which was not flowery and was not demonstrative, but was real, the slight change in register that meant something had landed. Town's opinion of Clara had been shifting since the fever. She had not gone looking for this information. It had come to her through Harriet Kroll, who reported things with the same unvarnished directness she brought to everything else. People were talking about it, Harriet said about the Bennett woman who had managed a serious fever alone on a ranch with no doctor and had done it right, who had stayed up all night and sent for help at the proper time and had the specific knowledge that comes not from books, but from having sat through something real. Dora Pell told her husband that you must have had training, Harriet said, sitting at the kitchen table on a Wednesday morning in the second week of October. Can't figure out any other explanation. Experience, Clara said. That's all. Dora doesn't have a category for women who learned things from experience rather than from someone qualified to teach them, Harriet said dryly. Confuses her. Clara poured more coffee. What does the rest of the town say? Depends on who you ask, Harriet said. The women who've been through a bad night with a sick child have more to say than the ones who haven't. The ones who haven't are still mostly interested in whether you and Wyatt are. She left it unfinished with deliberate tact. Irregular, Clara said. That word's still being used, Harriet confirmed. Less than before, but it's there. Clara sat down across from her. The morning light came through the kitchen window at the angle it came now, in October, lower and more golden than it had been in the summer, and it fell across the table, and across Harriet's hands, and across the mending basket in the corner, which was mostly Clara's work. Now the children's things, Wyatt's shirts, the ongoing negotiation between fabric and time that was just the fabric of domestic life. I'm not sure it matters as much as it did, Clara said. Not with defiance, but with the plain accuracy of someone who has stopped carrying a weight and is noting its absence. Harriet looked at her across the table. No, she said. I don't suppose it does. It was in the third week of October that Chester Holt came. Clara was in the yard when she heard the horse, and she turned and saw him coming up the road from the direction of town, with the particular posture of a man who has made a decision he's not entirely sure about, and is committed to it anyway. She recognized him from a distance, the broad shoulders, the way he sat a horse, like he owned the ground under it, and she felt, when she recognized him, a very specific internal stillness. Not the stillness of fear, the stillness of someone who knows exactly what is coming and has already decided what to do with it. She waited where she was. She did not go inside, and she did not go toward him. Just stood in the yard with her hands at her sides, in the clear October light, until he got close enough to recognize her too, and she watched him register her the upright posture, the fact that she did not look the way he apparently expected her to look after 2.5 months on a frontier ranch. He took his hat off. This surprised her slightly. Miss Bennett, he said. Mr. Holt, she said. He looked at the yard, the house, the garden. She watched him do the arithmetic of it, what he was seeing, what it implied about her situation, what it told him about how wrong he had been on the platform 3 months ago. She had no sympathy to offer him for the process. I heard about the Mercer girl, he said. About the fever. She recovered, Clarissa said. She's well, I know. People are talking about it. He turned his hat in his hands. She had seen men do this with hats, and it meant roughly the same thing. It always meant discomfort, dressed up as consideration. He stopped. Tried a different direction. I wasn't kind to you on the platform. No, Clara agreed. You weren't. I was hasty, he said. I made a judgment I shouldn't have made on a week's correspondence, and 30 seconds on a platform, and it wasn't right. He looked at her directly now, and she gave him credit for that, the looking directly. I understand you've established yourself here. I know the situation isn't. He stopped again. I wondered if you'd considered your options. Clara looked at him. My options, she said. Your arrangement here is. He made a careful gesture. Temporary, presumably. And I find myself in another stop. The hat was getting a thorough working over. My circumstances haven't changed, Miss Bennett. I still need someone who can manage a household. I looked at you for 30 seconds, and I was wrong about what I saw, and I'm man enough to say so. The directness of the speech, she thought, was probably genuine. He was not a cruel man, Chester Holt. He was a man who had made a fast calculation and been wrong about the variables, and who had enough character to come out here and say so. She gave him that. She thought about the platform, the loud, certain voice. She's too small. The dozen strangers who heard it. the walk to find Gerald Pruitt, and then Thomas Aldrich, and then the alley beside the hotel, with her hands flat against the warm wood, and $3.14 in her purse. She thought about all of it, and she let herself feel it, briefly, fully not to punish him with it, but because it was true, and it had happened, and it had led here, to this yard, to this life, which was nothing like what she had packed her trunk for, and which she was not willing to trade. No, she said. He blinked. I beg your no, Clara said again, evenly. I appreciate that you came to say what you said. I understand it cost you something to say it, and I don't dismiss that. But my answer is no. He looked at her for a moment, reassembling. My situation here is not your concern, she said. And it's not temporary. She held his gaze with the specific steadiness of someone who is done arranging their expression for other people's comfort. You looked at me for 30 seconds and decided I wasn't enough. I've spent 2.5 months proving that calculation wrong. Not to you, I wasn't thinking about you while I did it, but the proof is here regardless, and what you came to offer me today is a step backward that I have no interest in taking. Chester Holt was quiet for a moment. He was not a stupid man. She could see him processing what she had said and finding it more coherent than he had anticipated. You seem sure, he said. I am sure, Clara said. He put his hat back on. His expression had moved through several things and landed on something that was not quite respect but was adjacent to it. The look of a man revising a prior estimate, not happily, but honestly. I see, he said. I hope you find what you're looking for, Clara said, and she meant it without irony. He turned his horse and rode back down toward town, and Clara watched him go and felt not triumph, not the satisfaction of a score settled, something quieter than that, something that felt more like a door she had been standing in front of for a long time, and she had just walked through it and let it close behind her. She went back inside and finished the bread she had been in the middle of before she heard his horse. She told Wyatt about it that evening. She was not sure, afterward, why she had decided to tell him. It was her business entirely. The choice had been hers, and she owed him no accounting of it. But she told him plainly and without drama, sitting at the kitchen table after the children were in bed. She told him Chester Holt had come, and what he had said and what she had answered. Wyatt listened without interrupting. He had gotten better at this, or perhaps he had always been good at it, and she had recently begun to notice. When she finished, he looked at his coffee cup for a moment. You didn't have to tell me, he said. I know. Why did you? Clara thought about it. Because I wanted to be straight with you about things, she said. The way we agreed at the start. Wyatt looked up at her. He would have given you a household of your own, he said. It was not advocacy for Chester Holt. It was a fact being placed on the table between them, examined for what it was. He offered me his household, Clara said. That's a different thing. Wyatt's expression shifted, not dramatically. His face rarely did anything dramatically, but it changed in the specific way. That meant he was working through the implications of what she had said and finding them significant. Clara, he said. And the way he said it now, 3 weeks after the first time, was different from that first morning after the fever time. It had settled in, it fit. It's all right, she said. I mean what I said to him. I'm not telling you this to ask for anything or to... She stopped, made herself be accurate. I'm telling you because you should know where things stand. From my side, he was very quiet. The kitchen was warm and the stove ticked, and outside the wind had picked up, the kind of October wind that meant the temperature would drop again overnight. Where things stand from your side, he said slowly. I came here as hired help, Clara said. I want to be clear-eyed about that. I'm not pretending it's something else. And if it's become something else, Wyatt said. He said it without looking at her. The way people say the things they've been working up to looking at a neutral point. So the words don't get tangled in the looking. Clara did not answer right away. She sat with the question and felt its weight and was careful, because she had learned she had been teaching herself, though she could not have named it as a lesson until now, to be careful with her own hopes. Not to kill them, but to not let them run ahead of the actual territory. I'm not sure that's a conversation we're ready to have, she said. Either of us. Wyatt looked at her then. Maybe not, he said. But I wanted you to know I know it's become something else. He picked up his cup. That's all, just that I know. She held that thought, the way you hold something fragile and not yet identified carefully, with both hands, not sure yet what you have but unwilling to put it down. Okay, she said. They sat in the kitchen a while longer, not saying much, the silence doing the work that the words had started, and Clara thought about the letter she needed to write to her sister, which was going to be harder to write now than the last one had been, because this one was going to have to say more. So November settled over the ranch with the particular weight of a season that means business. The days shortened fast, the light going blue-gray by 4 in the afternoon, and the night sounds changed the coyotes further off, the horses more restless in the cold. Wyatt went to town for supplies on a Thursday and came back with the flour and the lamp oil and the salt, and also, set slightly apart from the other things in the wagon bed, a small canvas-wrapped package. He handed it to Cole at supper without ceremony. For the carving, he said. Cole unwrapped it at the table, a folding knife and a small fixed blade, both good quality, with handles made from a warm-colored wood that caught the lamplight. He looked at them for a long time without saying anything, running his thumb along the spine of the fixed blade with the instinctive care of someone who recognizes a good tool. Miss Clara put it on the list, Wyatt said. Cole looked up at Clara. She was on the other side of the table, eating her supper, not performing anything. Thank you, Cole said. Use them carefully, Clara said. Fixed blade for rough work and the folder for fine. Don't rush. Cole nodded. He set the knives down beside his plate with a care that suggested he understood they were not to be taken lightly, and he ate the rest of his meal with the particular focus of someone who already had the next hour planned. Clara watched him from the corner of her eye and felt she let herself feel it, briefly a thing that was close to satisfaction but ran deeper. The specific satisfaction of having paid attention to the right thing. After supper, Cole disappeared to the barn with his knives and a piece of pine she had put aside for him, the right wood, this time, and Clara and Mara did the dishes. And Wyatt sat at the table with the monthly ledger, and it was the most ordinary evening the Mercer household had had since Clara arrived, and the ordinariness of it was the thing. Mara handed her a plate to dry. Mrs. Kroll came by today, she said. When you were in the root cellar, what did she want? She said to tell you she's got a woman staying with her, a widow from out past the Henderson property. She lost her husband in the summer, and Mara searched for the word. Mrs. Kroll said she's barely managing. Clara dried the plate and set it in its place. Did she say what kind of help she needed? Work, I think. Real work. Like you do. Mara handed her another plate. Mrs. Kroll said you'd know what she meant. Clara considered this. She knew what Harriet meant. She knew it in the specific way you know things that are about you. Harriet was bringing her a version of the situation she had been in herself. 3 months ago, a woman alone in frontier country, with not enough to hold on to and nowhere obvious to turn. I'll go see her, Clara said. Mara nodded. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, in the careful way she said things that mattered, is it strange? That Mrs. Kroll brings it to you? What do you mean? That she thinks of you as the person to ask, for that kind of thing. Clara looked at the window over the sink, the dark outside, her own faint reflection. A little, she said honestly. A few months ago I was that woman. I know, Mara said. That's why she's asking you. Clara looked at Mara, at her serious face, and her mother's dark eyes, and the particular uncanny intelligence of her. 8 years old. 8 and already understanding things about why people go to each other and not other people, about what particular experience qualifies you for particular kinds of help. You're very perceptive, Clara said. Mara considered this. Mama said the same thing. She said it would be useful when I was older and uncomfortable when I was young. Clara laughed. It came out before she managed it. A real laugh, the kind that happens when something is truer than expected. She heard it, and it surprised her, the sound of it in this kitchen, and then it didn't surprise her at all. She went to see Harriet Kroll on Sunday, her free day, which she still took, and which Wyatt still honored without comment. The widow's name was Bess Traver, and she was younger than Clara had expected, 29, maybe 30, with the particular worn-down look of someone who has been running on obligation and grief simultaneously for 5 months. She sat at Harriet's table with her hands folded and answered Clara's questions with the careful economy of someone who has learned not to ask for more than they need. Clara recognized the economy. She had practiced it herself on that first morning in Red Hollow. What can you do? Clara asked. Not unkindly, but directly. Bess listed her skills the way Clara had once listed hers: cooking, keeping house, sewing, some knowledge of kitchen gardens. She had no experience with cattle or horses beyond basic care. She had a strong back and was not afraid of work. She was afraid of asking for help, which was something different. There's a ranch east of the Henderson property, Clarissa said. The Wren family. They lost their housekeeper in the fall, and they've got 3 young children and a husband running the operation. I don't know them well, but I know Harriet does. Harriet at the other end of the table nodded. Marcus Wren's a fair man. Not easy, but fair. I could write you a reference, Clara said to Bess, for what that's worth from someone who's not been here long. and I could go with you to introduce you if it would help. Bess looked at her. Why would you do that? Clara thought about Wyatt's note on the hotel desk. The specific precision of your under no obligation. The door that had been left open without conditions. Because someone did something similar for me, she said. Not exactly the same, but close enough. Bess was quiet for a moment. Then, with the controlled, careful manner of someone keeping their composure through practice rather than ease, she said, I'd be grateful. Don't be grateful yet, Clara said. Wait until it works. She heard herself say it and smiled slightly, because it was exactly what she had said to Wyatt on the first morning, and because the echo of it felt right in a way she didn't try to explain. Some things circled back. She wrote the reference that evening at the kitchen table, and Wyatt came in from outside and watched her writing and said, What's that for? She told him. He read the reference when she put the pen down, not because she offered it, but because he reached across the table and picked it up, which she allowed. He read it and set it back. You're vouching for someone you just met, he said. I know what she needs, Clara said. I know she can do the work. That's enough to vouch for. Wyatt was quiet for a moment. The Wrens are good people, he said. Marcus is hard to read, but he does right by the people who work for him. That's what Harriet said, then it'll probably work. He sat down. You've been busy, he said, and she heard in it something that was not criticism, and was not quite the word proud, because they were not at a word like that yet, but was somewhere near it. I have things to do, Clara said. I prefer being busy. I know, sis, he said, and then with the slight change in register she had learned to listen for, I've noticed. She looked at him across the table. He was not looking at his cup this time. He was looking at her directly, with the full attention of a man who has decided to stop pretending he's not paying attention. Wyatt, she said carefully. I know, he said, not yet. I heard you. He did not look away. I'm just saying I've noticed. 2.5 months of noticing. I thought you should know the Count. Clara held his gaze. Outside the wind pushed at the house, and the stove crackled, and somewhere above them, one of the children shifted in a bed, and the house settled around all of them the way houses do when they are holding the right number of people. She thought about the platform in Red Hollow 3 months ago. She thought about the weight of the trunk, and the $3.14, and the note that had come under the hotel door, not marriage, but honest work. She thought about all the ways a life could narrow to a single corridor with no visible door, and all the ways it could open again from exactly that place, if you stayed in the corridor long enough and paid attention to the walls. I know the Count too, she said. The corner of his mouth changed. Not a smile exactly. Wyatt Mercer's face was not built for easy smiling, but the shift that happened in that spot when something reached him. She had been watching for it long enough to recognize it now. Okay, he said, and picked up his cup. She went back to the reference letter and read it through once more for errors, and found one, a transposed word in the third sentence, and fixed it. The lamp was good and the kitchen was warm, and the letter to her sister, the one she had been putting off writing, was going to have to be written soon, because there was too much to say now to keep avoiding it. She would start it tomorrow. Tonight there was the letter for Bess Traver, and the bread to check on, and the list on the shelf that needed updating, and outside the wind was doing what October wind did, and the children were asleep upstairs, and the house was holding all of them, and that was enough. She was finding more than enough. The letter to her sister took Clara 4 attempts. The first 3 she folded and set aside, not burned, just set aside, because she was not the kind of person who destroyed things she had made an effort on, even when the effort had produced the wrong result. Each attempt had started in a different place and arrived at the same problem. She did not have the language for what her life had become, because the language she had brought with her from Ohio assumed a different kind of story. The language of the life she had planned: husband, household, new start. The clean arithmetic of a woman securing her future had no words for this. For a kitchen table in November, and a man who said, I know the Count too, without looking away, and 2 children who had needed her in ways she had not anticipated needing to be needed. The 4th letter started in the middle, the way honest letters sometimes have to. I am going to marry Wyatt Mercer, she wrote. I know this will surprise you, since I have not mentioned it as a possibility, and since the last letter I sent said only that I was staying. I am still staying. I intend to keep staying. He has not asked me yet in any formal sense. We are both too practical for rushing, but we have said enough to each other that the question is a formality and not the thing itself. The thing itself has been happening for months. She stopped there and looked at what she had written. Kept going. The children are Mara and Cole. They are 8. Mara is the kind of person who will be formidable when she grows up and is already partway there. Cole has started carving in wood with a new knife, and he is good at it in the way that means it is not just a hobby. Father's face, when he looks at Cole's work, is a thing I was not prepared for the first time I saw it. I am not their mother. I am not trying to be. But I am someone in their lives now, and they are someone in mine. And I did not come here looking for that, and I am glad I found it. I arrived with $3.14. I thought I was looking for someone to choose me. I understand now that was the wrong question. She finished the letter and sealed it and put it on the shelf next to Wyatt's list, which had the flour and the lamp oil and the winter nails and, at the bottom, in her own handwriting, one good thermometer. November deepened. Cattle drive had happened in mid-October. Wyatt and 2 hired hands moving the herd south for the fall sale, and he had come back 10 days later with the season's payment in his coat pocket and a kind of looseness to him that she hadn't seen before, the specific relief of a man who has made his numbers and knows the winter is covered. He had paid Clara's wages current and added 3 weeks without saying anything about it, just leaving the money on the shelf with a note that said only for the fever week and after. She had not argued with him about it. She had put the money away and added a line to her mental accounting of the household's resources, which had become, over the months, less a hired person's careful tracking and more the instinctive monitoring of someone who has a stake in how things come out. She had a stake. She had acknowledged this to herself sometime in October, formally, as though the acknowledgement required a deliberate act. She had a stake in this ranch, in these children, in this man who carried his grief the way some people carry an old injury, always there, incorporated into how they moved, not gone but no longer the only thing. He talked about Ellen more now, not constantly, and not in any way that made Clara feel she was competing with a memory, but naturally, the way you talk about someone who was part of the real history of a place. He told her about the garden. Ellen had planted the cottonwoods the first spring they were on the ranch, 6 of them, 3 of which had survived. He told her that Ellen had been a better judge of cattle than he was, and that they had argued about it often, and that she had usually been right. He told her once, late in the evening when the children were long asleep and the lamp was burning low, that the hardest part of the first year after her death had not been the grief exactly, but the silence. That Ellen had been the person he talked things through with, and without her the thinking had nowhere to go, it just circled. Clara had listened to this and said, "You could talk things through with me." He had looked at her. "I know," he said. "I've been trying to figure out if that was all right to want." "It's all right," she said. After that, he did. Not every night. He was not a man who talked for the sake of talking, but when there was something to think through, he thought it through with her. The winter feeds situation. Whether to add a second well on the north side of the property. What to do about the south fence that kept requiring repairs and might need to be rebuilt from scratch in the spring. Practical things, the substance of a life being run. She offered her thoughts, and he considered them with the same seriousness he brought to everything. And sometimes she was right, and sometimes he was, and they were both wrong once, about the feed calculation, and had to go back and redo the math together at the kitchen table, which was, she thought afterward, its own kind of intimacy, the willingness to be wrong in front of someone. December arrived, and with it the question of the holidays, which Clara navigated carefully, because this was the first territory she was genuinely uncertain about. Ellen's absence would be felt most sharply in December. She understood the first holidays had been the worst. She knew this from her own experience. The second and third had their own quality of loss, the way absence accumulates meaning over time. She did not try to replicate what Ellen had done. She asked Wyatt what the children had expected in previous years, and he told her, briefly, a small tree, if Cole could find a good one, decorations the children made, a special meal on Christmas Day, small gifts, and she said she could manage that, and managed it without drama, letting the children take the lead on the parts that were theirs to lead. Cole found the tree, a decent juniper, that he and Wyatt cut together on a Saturday morning, while Clara and Mara made the kitchen smell like cinnamon and dried apple for the first time in 2 years. Mara made paper decorations, which was apparently what she had always done, and Cole made 3 carved wooden ornaments with his new knife, rough but recognizable, a horse, a bird, something that was either a dog or a very stylized cow that everyone agreed was a horse to spare his feelings. They hung on the tree, those 3 small carved things, and when the lamplight caught them, Clara watched Wyatt look at them for a long moment, and she understood what he was seeing: his son's hands making something. The future being built out of small useful skills, the particular proof that children survive. She made the Christmas meal herself, with Mara beside her for the parts Mara could manage, and the table was set with the blue flower dishes from the left cupboard, because it was a Sunday, and Mara had said her mother let them use them on Sundays, and Clara had agreed. They ate with the blue dishes and the small tree in the corner and the winter cold pressed against the windows, and Cole told a story about the rooster that was mostly accurate and partially embellished and entirely funny, and Mara laughed so hard she had to put down her fork, and Wyatt laughed too. And Clara sat at that table and looked at all of it and thought, this is the thing. This ordinary imperfect meal, in this ordinary imperfect house, in this nothing town, in this enormous indifferent landscape. This is the thing people mean when they say they want a life. She had wanted a life. She had come 3/4 of the way across a country for it. She had stood in an alley with almost nothing, and she had made a different decision than the one she had planned for, and it had led her here. To this table, to this meal, to these particular people. The proposal, when it happened, was nothing like what she would have written if she were writing the story. It was a Saturday morning in January, one of the clear, sharp days that came between storms, the sky so blue it looked unreal above the white ground. Wyatt had come in from the morning chores, and was at the counter with his coffee, still in his coat, and Clara was at the table with the household ledger, which she had taken over in November with his agreement. She had found a discrepancy in the feed costs that she was working through. The children were outside, Cole at the barn, and Mara on the porch, pretending to read but actually watching the ravens that had taken an interest in the woodpile. I want to ask you something, Wyatt said. Give me 1 minute, Clara said, not looking up, because she had the number almost. He waited. She found the discrepancy a duplication in the October entry and corrected it and put the pen down and looked up. He was not at the counter anymore. He was standing closer to the table, still in his coat, his coffee cup held in both hands, looking at her with the specific expression she had come to know, the one that meant he had decided to say the thing and was committed. I want to ask you to marry me, he said. I've been trying to figure out how to ask it in a way that wasn't. I kept coming up with versions that were either too much or not enough. I don't have a ring. I know that's... He stopped. I want to do right by you, Clara. I want you to have what you're owed. A proper arrangement. A real claim on this place and on... He paused, on us. All of us. Clara looked at him standing in his coat with his coffee cup and his imperfect speech. She had imagined this moment differently, once in the life she had planned. She had imagined something considered and formal, a man who had courted her properly and offered the right words in the right order. What she had instead was a rancher in a work coat who had been trying to figure out how to phrase it and had landed on honesty instead of phrasing, which was, she thought, exactly right. Yes, she said. He let out a breath. It was not loud, but she heard it, the small release of someone who had not been entirely sure. I told you I didn't have a ring, he said. I know. I'll get one. When I go to town. You don't have to, she said. But if you want to, I wear a 5. Something shifted in his face, the humor of it reaching him. The practicality of her response, which was so entirely characteristic of her that she could see him register it as something he wanted in his life permanently. He set the coffee cup down on the table and sat across from her, and they looked at each other in the clear January light. Two practical people who had come to something real through the back door of necessity and work and staying when staying was hard. I'll tell the children today, he said. Let me be there, Clara said. When you tell them. I was planning on it. They told the children at lunch. Wyatt said it plainly, in the way he said most things, that he and Miss Clara had decided to get married, that it would be a small and simple ceremony, that this was not a change in the household so much as a making official of what the household had already become. Mara looked at Clara, and then at her father, and then at Clara again, and her face ran through several things very quickly. And then she said, Does that mean Miss Clara stays always? That's what it means, Clara said. Mara nodded once firmly with the finality of someone marking something settled. Good, she said, and went back to her lunch. Cole was quiet for longer. He was looking at his plate in the way he had when he was thinking, and not yet ready to say the result. Clara waited. She had learned how to wait for Cole. He looked up. He looked at his father first, and then at Clara, and what was in his face was not the resistance calculation she had seen on that first morning, the crossed arms deliberate not looking. It was the face of a boy who has been measuring something for a long time and has finally come to a number. You're not replacing Mama, he said, not a challenge. Statement of something he had worked out for himself and was putting into words. No, Clara said, I'm not, and I'm not trying to. I know, Cole said. I figured that out a while ago. He looked at his plate again. I just wanted to say it so it was said. It's said, Clara agreed. He ate his lunch. The kitchen was quiet in the way it was quiet when it was holding something complete. The wedding was in February. On a Thursday, at the town hall in Red Hollow, a civil ceremony performed by the Justice of the Peace, a small man named Albert Howe, who had the professional manner of someone who had done this many times, and found it neither romantic nor tedious, but simply the work of a useful institution. Harriet Kroll came, Bess Traver came, with the particular brightness of someone who has recently found solid ground under their feet and not yet stopped being grateful for it. She had been 3 months at the Wren Ranch, and Marcus Wren had proved as fair as advertised, and she had sent Clara a note in January that said only it worked, like you said to wait for. Dr. Foss happened to be in town and appeared at the back of the room with his bag still over his shoulder, as though he had been passing and decided to stop, which was probably accurate. The children were there, Cole in a pressed shirt that he had allowed Clara to press without protest, and Mara in her good dress with her hair done properly, which she had asked Clara to do that morning, in a way that was very careful to frame it as practical rather than ceremonial, which Clara had understood and honored. Clara wore her gray dress, not the blue one, not a new one, the gray working dress that had become, in the months at the ranch, the garment she associated with the actual substance of her life here. It was clean and pressed and entirely appropriate, and she had thought about buying something for the occasion and decided against it on the grounds that she was marrying the life she had actually been living, not a dressed-up version of it, and she wanted to look like herself. Wyatt wore his good coat, which had been remended at the shoulder, and he had cut his hair, and he stood beside her in front of Albert Howe with the same stillness he brought to everything, and said the words when the words were required, and meant them. She said the words and meant them too. Albert Howe said the words that made it official, and they signed the record book, and Harriet Kroll said about time under her breath, in a way that was audible to everyone, and intended to be, and Cole made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was close, and Mara reached over and took Clara's hand, just briefly, just for a moment, and then let go. They went home. They had a better-than-usual supper, which Clara had prepared ahead, and the blue dishes came out again. And Wyatt opened the bottle of good whiskey that had been on the shelf since before Ellen died and poured himself, and Clara each a measure, and poured Cole and Mara each a thimble, because it was a formal occasion, and the frontier had its own logic about these things. Cole made a face at the taste. Mara said it smelled like wood. Wyatt said his father had said the same thing, and the conversation went from there, and the evening was ordinary and specific and entirely itself. Later, when the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Clara sat at the kitchen table and felt the weight of the day settle. Not heavily, just settle, the way things do when they have arrived at where they were going. She thought about what she would tell someone if someone asked her what she had learned from all of this. She had been thinking about it for weeks, in the way you think about things when you know they are approaching a kind of conclusion that deserves accounting. She thought she would say, "The life you plan for is almost never the life you get, and this is not primarily a tragedy." She had planned for a husband on a platform in Ohio, chosen from letters, a clean transaction between her need and someone else's. She had gotten instead 3 rejections in a single morning, and a note slid under a hotel room door, and a ranch that smelled like grief, and a little girl with a fever, and a boy who crossed his arms against the world, and a man who said, "I've been trying to figure out if it was all right to want." She had gotten instead the life that was actually waiting for her, which she could not have found if she had gotten what she planned for. She thought she would say, being chosen is not the same as having value. She had arrived in Red Hollow, believing, somewhere below her practical surface, that her worth would be settled by whether someone selected her, that the right man's approval would mean she was enough. 3 men in one morning had recalculated that equation for her, and the calculation had been right, just not in the way they intended. What it had shown her was that their choosing or not choosing had nothing to do with her actual worth, which was not determined by other people's quick assessments on dusty platforms. Worth was demonstrated differently. It was in the cold water at 2 in the morning, and the bean rows, and the correctly stacked woodpile, and the letter written for a woman she had just met, because she understood what the woman needed. Thought she would say, staying is an act, not obsessivity. She had stayed at the Mercer Ranch through 100 small reasons to leave Cole's resistance, the town's sideways looks, the uncertainty of her position, the rawness of a household still bleeding from its loss. She had stayed not because she had nowhere to go, but because she had made a decision that she was going to see what was actually here, before she decided it wasn't enough. That decision, made in a small room with a window that looked into an alley, had been the most important one she made. Not the grand decision of the wedding ceremony. The small daily decision of still being there when everyone woke up. She thought she would say, "Grief in a house is not the enemy of love." She had worried, in the early weeks, about Ellen, about the mending basket and the blue dishes and the window seat, and all the places where a woman's absence is most visible. She had navigated it badly once or twice, said things that weren't quite right, held back when she should have spoken. But she had learned that grief and love are not competing for the same space, that the presence of one does not diminish the other, that a house can hold both without either one winning. Cole had taught her this. In the end, Cole, who had loved his mother so fiercely he could not look at Clara for weeks, and who had eventually understood that looking at Clara did not mean looking away from his mother. The spring came slowly, the way spring came on the Texas frontier, not the sudden decisive spring of Ohio, but a gradual persuasion. The temperature rising by degrees, the ground softening reluctantly, the first green appearing in the garden beds that Clara had amended through the winter with compost from the barn. She was in the garden on the first truly warm Saturday of April, working the soil near the onion beds where she had crouched beside Mara in that first summer, when she heard the porch and looked up. Mara was sitting on the fence reading, a new book. Wyatt had brought books from town, gradually adding them to the shelf beside Clara's own small collection until the shelf was genuinely a library for a 9-year-old, which Mara had become in February. Cole was near the barn with a piece of wood and his fixed blade, working on something larger than he had attempted, before she could see his concentration from where she knelt, the specific set of his shoulders that meant he was fully in it. Wyatt came out of the barn and crossed the yard and came to stand at the edge of the garden. He looked at what she was doing, and then at the beds, and then at her, and she pushed her hair back from her face with the back of her wrist because her hands were dirty, and he crouched down at the edge of the bed. "The onions came up," he said. "They do every year if you thin them right," Clara said. "Mara's getting good at it." He looked at the row. "Ellen planted these beds the first spring we were here," he said. Not sadly factually in the way he talked about her now, the tense properly calibrated. She said good garden soil was the only thing that would make her feel like the ranch was really a home. She was right, Clara said. It's the best soil on the property. She'd amended it for 3 years by the time. He stopped. Put a lot of work in. "I know," Clara said. "I'm working in it." He looked at her. Something in his face settled the particular settling that happened when something was understood without needing more words. "You are." She went back to the soil, stayed crouched at the edge, and after a moment he reached into the bed and pulled a weed from between 2 onion sprouts with the practiced ease of someone who has done this before. Then he pulled another. She moved down the row and he moved with her, the two of them working the bed together, not talking, the morning coming fully into itself around them. From the fence, Mara looked up from her book. She watched them for a moment, her father's back, Clara's hands in the dirt, the particular nearness of people who have become easy with each other. And she looked at Cole. Cole had not looked up from his carving, but Mara saw in the line of his shoulders the slight loosening that meant he knew what was happening without watching it, that he had already decided what it meant, that he had decided it was all right. She went back to her book. Clara did not see any of this. She was in the soil, which was the best soil on the property, amended by a woman who had understood what a garden meant, and amended further by Clara herself through a winter's work, and growing now in the first warmth of April with the particular stubbornness of things that have been properly prepared. She felt the sun on her back, and the earth under her hands, and Wyatt working beside her, and she thought about the woman she had been on the platform in Red Hollow 9 months ago, the careful posture, the $3.14, specific loneliness of someone who has traveled a great distance and arrived to find the welcome removed. She had compassion for that woman. She understood her. She also understood that what that woman had wanted someone to choose her, to resolve the uncertainty of her worth with a yes spoken on a platform, would not have given her what she had now. It would have given her resolution. Resolution and this were not the same thing. Harder. This had cost more. She had earned it in cold water and bean rows and honest conversations and the long labor of showing up without guarantee. Nobody had handed it to her, and nobody was going to. And that was the point, the actual point, the thing she would want to say to a woman sitting in an alley with her hands flat against warm wood and almost nothing in her pocket. The point is not to be chosen. The point is to know your own worth well enough that you stop waiting for someone else to name it. Point is to stay in the corridor long enough to find the door that was never obvious, the one that opened onto the actual life rather than the planned one. She had arrived believing survival meant finding someone who would choose her. She had learned slowly and imperfectly, and through more than a few mornings of not being certain she was right, that this had it backward. You choose yourself first. You stay in the hard place and you do the work and you tell the truth about what you see and you open your door to the cold morning and you keep going. And eventually the life you get is not the one you packed for but the one you built. And it is yours in a way that nothing handed to you could ever be. Onion row was finished. Clara sat back on her heels and looked at it, the thin green sprouts in their proper spacing, the dark amended soil, the work of a morning. Then she looked up at the sky, which was the enormous pale blue of April in Texas, and at the cottonwood trees that Ellen Mercer had planted in the first spring, and 3 of which had survived, and at the house that had been a house in grief, and was becoming slowly, on its own schedule, something else. Wyatt stood and brushed the soil from his hands. He looked down at her and held out his hand, the way you do when someone is kneeling in a garden and needs to stand, a practical gesture with nothing complicated in it. Just here. I have this. Let me help. Took it. She stood, Mara red on the fence. Cole's knife moved in the wood. Cottonwoods were beginning to leaf, pale green and tentative, and the garden was waking up, and the life that Clara Bennett had not planned for, and had not known she was building until she was already inside it, stretched forward in all its ordinary, imperfect, entirely real directions. She had come west looking for someone to choose her. She had found, instead, the harder and more lasting thing herself, choosing,